Welcome, everybody. Welcome to Your Guide to Getting Promoted, a special webinar for law enforcement promotional candidates. We're so happy you're here. My name is Scott Savage. I'm the founder of the Savage Training Group and law enforcement officer. I've got a great panel that I want to introduce in a second, but just want to give you kind of an overview of what we're trying to accomplish. We basically want to put together everything we know about getting promoted, getting specialty assignments, and kind of package it up for you, and then just hand it over to you as really a service to you. Law enforcement is the greatest career around, and kind of rising up through the ranks just gives you a better opportunity, better position to kind of take a leadership role within your agency. So I'll give you just a little bit about myself. This is my 22nd year, I think it is, in law enforcement. I started over at Palo Alto PD in California. I did 18 years there, the last 7 as a sergeant, and then lateraled over to Santa Clara Police, also in California, where I'm back to being an officer. So I can actually tell you a little bit about rising up through the ranks to officer, and then going back to, rising up the ranks to sergeant, coming back to an officer, and what that's like. And lately I've been assigned to our recruiting and hiring board. So just been doing a lot of oral interviews. So I want to talk to you a little bit about maybe some successes we see with that, and some things that folks can improve upon. But without further ado, just want to introduce the other Savage Training Group instructors there. And then of course, our special guest, Lloyd McKinnon, joins us. Lloyd, would you just say a couple of words about yourself, if you would?
Good morning, everybody. Currently a patrol watch commander at Stanislaus County. Started my career about 20 years ago in New England. And I'm just happy to be a part of Savage Training Group, and looking forward to today's webinar. Thank you.
Thanks, Lloyd. Dan.
Hey, good morning, everybody. My name is Dan Flippo. I was in law enforcement for about 29 and a half years. I worked with the Santa Cruz Police Department. I retired recently in September. I retired as a deputy chief of operations. But prior to that, I was the deputy chief of admin. And what that meant was I was in charge of hiring and all of the internal promotional process for my department for about 2.5 years. So I've literally sat through hundreds of interviews, both internally and for other agencies, for whether it's getting into law enforcement or through promotional processes. So I'm hoping, I have a little insight on having sat across both sides of the table, myself trying to get promoted from sergeant to lieutenant to deputy chief, and then also seeing what has worked and what hasn't worked really so well for somebody that's trying to either get promoted to sergeant or lieutenant. And again, that perspective, both what I've seen internally and then having been part of panels for other agencies. But really excited, and thank you everybody for joining us this morning.
Awesome. Well, we're glad to have both of you guys there, and both Lloyd and Dan do just a fantastic job. So it's great to have them on this webinar. And then really big treat today, we're kind of joined by a special guest. I think he's going to provide a lot of insight for us. So we're very lucky to have you, Under Sheriff Mike Barnett from the San Diego County Sheriff's Department. Mike, thank you so much for being here.
Thank you, Scott. It's a pleasure to be with you all, especially with Dan and Lloyd today for what I think is going to be a very powerful and impactful webinar for all of our attendees. Like Scott said, my name is Mike Barnett. I'm currently serving as the Under Sheriff of San Diego County. 29 years in law enforcement, all with the San Diego Sheriff's Department. I've worked about every area of my organization: jail, patrol, investigations, administration, and various roles within each of those capacities, and at all ranks. Our agency is pretty large. We have 4,400 employees, 2,600 sworn. So we promote a lot of people. And over the last several years, over the last 10, 12 years, I've had a role in each and every one of those promotions. So I've seen what works, what doesn't work. And I hope that by the end of this webinar, you'll have some definite action items to put into your journal and be ready for the next step in your career. And by the way, thank you all for stepping up. Seeking promotion is a tough thing. It's more responsibility, and we need good leaders in law enforcement. So good for you for stepping up and taking part in this webinar today. Thank you.
Yeah, listen, we kind of just did a quick look at some of the folks that had registered. About 180 folks registered, and then Some are joining us live here. Some will be watching it back, and about 80% of them were at the officer, deputy, detective, corporal rank. About 10% were sergeants, and then the remaining were lieutenants and captains. And I think a lot of the stuff we're going to share is universal, but we'll try to touch on maybe each one of those things from each of the panelists' perspective and kind of how we see things. There's a lot of similarities, but each one of us comes from a different background, different size agency, so we can kind of give you a little bit different flavor, and then you can see kind of how that works out with you. I want to ask just a quick question, and Dan, maybe we'll start with you. I'll cue you up ahead of time here. I remember when trying to get promoted that I would kind of hear a phrase that would keep getting repeated over and over again to candidates who were not selected. And I always thought to myself, gosh, this phrase isn't helpful. And I kind of think it was because maybe the folks that were making the decisions didn't want to really say what's going on. Don't know if they were fearing liability or something like that. But it was this phrase: people wouldn't be promoted, and they would be told something along the lines of, hey, man, you didn't get it this time, but just keep doing what you're doing. Just keep being you. It's just not the timing's not right, not a good fit right now. But you just keep doing you. And I think when agencies tell candidates stuff like that, the poor candidate's sitting there and going, yeah, I can't do anything with that. So just keep doing exactly what I'm doing. Well, if that's true, great. Maybe my turn is next. But sometimes I think we don't tell candidates exactly why they're not getting promoted, and maybe we sort of know about it. Any thoughts on that, Dan? Is there something we can do maybe better?
Yeah, well, I'll start with the good news first. Sometimes in promotional processes or assignments, it truly is there's multiple very well qualified candidates, and there's there's only one position, say if it's for a specialty unit. And so unfortunately, sometimes somebody gets it and like, man, I've been there where, man, I wish I could promote to both, but I only have one position. So I gotta pick one. But really, let's get to the heart of it. On a side note, I think it's unfortunate when you hear that, and I think it's interesting when you hear that kind of response. I mean, Scott, I think you nailed it on the head. Sometimes if you give too much information, then HRs, I will say, human resource departments aren't really good with that. They're like, hey, just let the promotional process stand and then give some feedback. But that doesn't help the candidate. So it's very important that you have somebody in your agency or maybe outside of your agency that you can really springboard some honest questions off you, because the reality is sometimes you may be a great hard worker, but there's a comma or a but comma there. And that's really where you kind of need to do your searching to find out what is that, for lack of a better word, that but. So, hey, he or she's a great hard worker and they're very knowledgeable, but. And so that comes down to, like it or not, that can come down to a perception or a misperception about you, or some perspective that the people in charge or your command staff has. And I hate to tell you this, but really it's going to be your responsibility to try to identify that and fix whatever that perception is. And I know sometimes in my past, when I've been mentoring somebody, it's really upset them. It's really ticked them off. Well, that's not right. That's a misperception. Great. Granted, I'll agree. It's not who you are. But if these people are making the choices and that's the perception they have, you've got to figure out a way to deal with that. And in a larger agency, I think, you can kind of get lost. I definitely think not lost, but, you can transfer to and kind of start anew, for a smaller agency or a medium-sized agency. Hey, we know everybody, warts and all. So really, before you even promote, you really should try to have a true assessment of who you are and what others perceive you. What are your strengths and weaknesses? And I can say, like, I've had them for me. And when I was promoting to lieutenant, people said, hey, you stand a good shot, but there was this, I'm very passionate and I can lose people in the conversation. So I had to fix that. That was something I could have gotten angry. Well, doesn't make any sense, because what I'm passionate about is the correct answer. Doesn't matter. If that's going to be the hiccup that's not going to allow me to get promoted, then that's something I have to fix. So really, if you want to be an excellent leader too, you should be doing soul searching anytime and really checking where you're at and kind of find out what those perceptions are, and then really going after it and trying to change it just by, all right, if they think this, then I'm going to try to start taking steps to show them different. And I will say it's a balancing act, because we don't ever run down the hallway of our departments waving a flag saying, look, here I am, I'm doing all this stuff. So really it's a game of inches, just constantly being focused on that. Hey, what can I do internally for myself to try to make some changes that reflect externally? I hope that answers it, Scott.
No, you brought up just a lot of great points. And I think, if I'm listening to this webinar, I would just grab a piece of paper and start writing down bullet points, maybe action items. So, kind of some of the things that I heard that I picked up about what you said was, you mentioned the hard worker thing. And I think if you're an officer, you're a deputy, and you're looking to promote to sergeant, this is a definite takeaway for you is, are they interviewing for hardest working patrol officer? Are they interviewing for patrol deputy who makes the most arrests? Because if that's what you're interviewing for, you might get it. If instead what you're interviewing for is sergeant, you need to start thinking a few more steps ahead. Walking into an interview, or telling everybody how many great arrests you make and how hard you work, that's a piece of it. That's a piece of great work ethic and tenacity and stuff like that. But that's a small piece of it. And I think that is oftentimes, for the officer deputy level, something that they kind of need to make the switch here. Don't go into an interview interviewing for a position you already have. So if I'm a patrol deputy and I walk into my sergeant's interview and I'm going to say, listen, I made the most stolen vehicle arrests last year than everybody. I wrote the most search warrants than anyone else did. The interview panel goes, well, hey, that's great. And if we were interviewing for hardest working cop, you'd get it. But I think it's a little bit of a transition there. The second, bullet point I heard, Dan, that you talked about there is going and figuring out what that but is. And that means we're going to have to take the ego down a little bit and go, okay, there's something here that's going to keep me from getting promoted. Do I wait till the promotional process to figure that out? Or do I gotta go figure it out now? That ton of great takeaways there, Lloyd. I want to bring you into this conversation and kind of get from your perspective. Candidates are being told, hey, just do your own. Just keep doing what you're doing. Don't know if that's really helpful. What are kind of some of the things that you're seeing?
Yeah, just what Dan said. The fit's not right, or just keep doing what you're doing, or we really like you. Those things really don't help you to the next level. So if you're already in a leadership role and you need to go as far as do a 360 eval on yourself and reach out to your peers, or find someone that's you really respect in the department that will tell you the truth, like the guy that'll make you cry, he'll tell you the truth, that real. So you want to find out what that bud is. And if it's, some guys are, hey, if you're a sergeant already, you're too friendly with the guys. If you're an FTO, hey, you're always joking around a little bit too much. And if that's your personality, you might have to curtail it a little bit to get yourself lined up for that leadership role. As a deputy, as an officer, Scott, like you said, I've made 20 10851 arrests this week. Well, that's great if you're going out for the auto theft task force. But really, as getting to the next level as a sergeant, you want to, hit those bullet points of, are you an FTO? Did you do anything with the Explorer program? Outside of work, have you coached? Have you developed anybody? Stuff like that really, really helps. Those are definitely some of the bullet points I would take away. But that what I call that jacket, that stigmatism on you, and if you're in a small agency where it's hard to get rid of, it's something that's going to take a little bit, and it starts today, right now, where you really have to do some soul searching, dig deep. It hurts. Find that person and start working on yourself, because it's not impossible. We've all seen the guys where you remember him as officer and you're like, oh, I was at a party with that guy one time and he did X, Y, and Z, and now he's the undersheriff. Well, you have to work through that kind of stuff, and we all make mistakes, but part of building is fixing those.
Are you talking about Mike? Were you at a party?
Did I point to him? No, wherever he is.
No, something you brought up there, Lloyd, I think maybe another takeaway, if I was listening to this, is okay, what have you done for other people, right? Especially if you're going up in rank, you're leaving the officer deputy rank and you're going to start now, going up in rank. Naturally, that's a leadership position. That is all about other people. So it would be great if you can walk into the oral interview and describe all the stuff you've done for other people. And here's the thing. Did you do it in a contrived way where when the promotional process was announced, you began sort of showing the trappings of leadership? You showed up at a few meetings, you tried to coach some folks, or is this something that's really part of you? Is this something where you really take the time, when no one's looking, and mentor people? You get involved in other programs, things that maybe you weren't asked of, and you really start not looking at yourself, your own career, but how can I help other people? What can I do to build up other folks? Gosh, if you can go in and talk about something like that in your oral interview, and you have a long-standing history, maybe a reputation for that, that's really showing, hey, I kind of get, what promoting up the ranks is about.
Yeah, for sure. And then that starts right now with this webinar. I mean,
Yeah.
there's no time like the present, whether it's helping someone with their well-being, their wellness at work, or teaching the new guy how to fill out a TOE form, if you would.
Right. No, that's a good point. Mike, what are your thoughts on that? Maybe folks, how they get feedback, or maybe, positioning yourself, kind of we're getting the wheels turning here. What are you thinking?
Yeah, thanks, Scott. I think Dan and Lloyd made some excellent points. And I think one of the main takeaways from this for our attendees would be realizing that promotion is not determined on the day of the test. You could have your uniform squared away, your brass all polished up, and you could go in there and answer every question perfectly. But it's everything you've done from maybe the moment you first showed up with a recruiter or a background investigator, and that person, by the time you're ready for promotion, is now a lieutenant or a captain in your agency and making decisions. And then every day when you show up for work, what are you doing? We look for selfless leaders to promote, not selfish. So like, Scott was saying, what have you done for other people? If you've done it in a way to only benefit yourself, then you're not really helping other people. The path to promotion is not paved on the backs of your coworkers. You can't step on them in order to promote. You can build them all up and make a great team, and that's a good path to promotion. I'd also say keep your eyes open for opportunities. I remember I was a relatively new lieutenant and in a specialized unit, and all of a sudden our captain retired, and this was back during the Great Recession many years ago, and the agency was just not in a position to promote people at that time because of fiscal concerns. So they said, you're an acting captain. So I was the junior lieutenant in this cadre of 4 captains, and all of a sudden I became their leader. Well, it would have been real easy for me to walk around saying, well, I know you guys are all senior to me and I'm not worthy to be your leader, and kind of undermine myself in that way. But instead, without, beating them over the head with it, I just started acting like I thought a captain should act, and leading them and supporting them and giving them the resources they needed to do the job. And that worked. That was successful. The hard part, of course, when you're given that role, whether maybe you're an acting sergeant in a detective unit or on a patrol team for a period of time, the likelihood is you're going to go back to being a peer at the end of that acting period. So if you've used that time to, pave your path to promotion on the backs of your coworkers, then you will probably more than likely stay at that lower level, if not forever, certainly for longer than you would have if you use the opportunity to build up your team and make them even better than they were. So selflessness as opposed to selfishness is a huge factor in what we look for in promotional candidates.
That reminds me, Mike, the previous agency I worked at, we had an acting sergeant, right? And he was a corporal, and he got the acting sergeant gig. Great. He was in a traffic unit. And while he was in there, he told the other officers whom he, yesterday was their peer, and after this assignment, he'll go back to being their peer. When in the office, he would like to be referred to as Acting Sergeant Smith. We'll call him that to protect his identity, but that didn't go over big. That wasn't real popular with his buddies, who were like, you're still the same screw up and you will be the same screw up tomorrow. And maybe that comes into a little bit of ego and a little bit of selflessness. And if you're really viewing, the promotion or even an acting assignment as, this, look how great I am now, you might want to rethink that mindset. Becoming a sergeant or a lieutenant or a cat, or whatever rank you're after, is honestly less about you and more about other people, if you're doing it right. And maybe something to consider is, this, as you go up in rank, it's only hard to be a sergeant correctly. It's only hard to be a lieutenant correctly. If you want to do it incorrectly, kind of just bark orders at people, admire yourself and how awesome you are, pontificate in briefings about how wonderful you are and how smart you are. That's pretty easy to do. It's much more difficult to, do what Mike just suggested there, was serve people, right? Be a servant leadership. Now, whether you give it those fun names or not, it's really about other people. Mike, you mentioned not trying to get promoted on the backs of other people. One thing that I think is going to come up in an oral interview, and I'm interested in how the panel might think of this question, is there's a good chance you're going to be asked as a promotional candidate something along the lines of, what makes you the best candidate for this position? So it's you and however many other people that are going for it, and what makes you the best candidate for this position. And I'm wondering what's a good way to answer that, because it might be tempting to go, well, let me tell you, first of all, I'm not Joe. Joe's an idiot, right? And Joe's a screw up and everybody knows it. And then there's Sally over here, and everybody knows what Sally's about, and she's garbage, right? But me, I'm great. Like, I'm the best of the worst, maybe. How would you guys suggest to answer that question?
Well, I think that's a great point, of course, and you just have to lead in with something as simple as, it's a real honor to be here in this position, to be interviewing for sergeant with my colleagues. We're all hard workers. We all do great. And then just pivot immediately and start talking about yourself. You don't have to beat them over the head that all these folks are at least as good, if not better than you are. Just acknowledge that you work with a great team and for a great agency. Unless it's just plainly obvious that that's not the case, that would be a bad situation to be in. But 90% of the time, you're proud of your organization. You think they're doing great things, and you want to be a bigger part of it. So you're seeking promotion. So give credit where credit's due, and then set that aside and talk about your own qualities and what makes you a good candidate for promotion, without comparing yourself to Joe or Sally or anybody else.
I like that. Lloyd, what's your
I always acknowledge my peers. Definitely give them, what they deserve. If you're already made it to the oral board or the oral panels, then, you acknowledge the panelists and tell them, you have a fine group. If they made it this far, I've worked with these other folks that are testing. They're my peers. They've been on my squad. You have a difficult job today as panelists, because we have a lot of good people testing. Something along that lines, to show right out of the gate that you're even bringing people up when they're your competition, quite frankly.
Yeah, maybe kind of already leaning into the fact that, if you promote me, I might be supervising these folks. So maybe not throwing them down is a good way. Dan, any thoughts on how to proceed there?
Well, first off, I've always, people I've coached too, I've asked, well, why do you want to promote? Do you even know the why of what's important to you? If it's just that, you think suddenly you're going to get stripes on your sleeves or bars on your collar, and then you'll be able to make change. I think you're doing yourself some discredit, because really that's going more towards the rank side than that leadership side. And you're going to hear a common theme today. As you promote, it shouldn't be about you. I know I'm going to answer the question in a minute, Scott, but it shouldn't be about you. It should be about what you can do for others and how you can get others to work. And so you knowing like what is internally motivating you to even try to promote and take a rank, if not a leadership position within your organization. And that's going to help, I think, start to define, okay, then what sets me apart from this other person? And two, so one, know your why, but then the other thing is, like, what are your strengths? Because one of the things that we do know is that when people come into let's just go on the sergeant's panel, pretty much, or this people that the candidates for sergeant, those people all pretty much have a diverse background. They've probably all been to FTOs or detectives or worked specialty units. And so you've really got to find out what's unique to you as far as what strengths, characteristics have those assignments created that are going to complement, if not greatly increase your abilities to do the supervisor job. And so part of answering this is not like, well, when I get promoted, I will do X, Y, and Z. It really should be, no. When I'm promoted, I know I'm going to have success because I'm already doing this in a diminished, I'm not a sergeant yet. But as an FTO, I didn't just have one-on-one supervision of a person. Well, that's great because you're an FTO. That's what you're supposed to do. What did you learn from that? How did you, so we asked what that but is, what's kind of that plus one? What's the added on thing that you've done with each one of those assignments? And again, it comes back to, it's not about you. It's what you've, it's not about just how great am I? When you get into a supervisor position or a leader position, it's really about, hey, how can I change others around me for the better, hopefully, because bad leaders kind of work in a vacuum, I think, and don't really concern about those others. So I think just having that perspective of what internally motivates you, and then with all your assignments, how has it created you to better serve the people that are going to be beneath you, or as far as your subordinates, and then also just being able to take those skills that you've made and how are they going to already today, how are you fulfilling that role of a supervisor or a lieutenant with the skill sets that you already have, even though you're not technically in that assignment yet?
Yeah, you mentioned you mentioned the fact that you coach people, and for the folks that are watching this, we'll really get into that towards the end of our time together today about some coaching that we offer. And both Lloyd and Dan just do a really fantastic job doing some one-on-one coaching. And maybe that's a way to kind of get an outside perspective, not the folks in your agency, but an actual objective thing, perspective. But one thing you mentioned, Dan, was knowing the why. And gosh, we all hear about know your why, and we read the Simon Sinek and leadership books, but I think that's a important thing. And if you're gonna walk into the interview and say, well, it's just about that time, to get promoted, don't know that really communicates what you want to communicate there. It's almost just like, hey, I'm owed it. I've been here a long time. Why don't you go ahead and hand me the stripes and the bars now? That's maybe not the most powerful thing to lead with. But here's another thing to watch out for. If you're going to go in and say something along the lines of, this place is screwed up and I want to be in a position to fix it. That may be true. Maybe where you work is screwed up and you're the guy or the woman to fix it. Okay, we'll go with that hypothesis, but what sort of message would that say? Now, I don't know if anyone's going to walk in and say those exact words, but they may certainly imply it, or their reputation might already be preceding them, right? In walks the door. Here's the candidate who does nothing but badmouth admin, say how screwed up this place is. He's the smartest guy in the room. He and only he knows how to fix this. And he walks into the door. I don't know if that's ever happened for you guys that are all administrators. Walk me through, if you've seen that, how to approach that. Is that a good strategy? I think I know the answer, but what do you think when I say that?
I think it's going to be a short interview, to be honest with you. I mean, if you kind of come in, if that's, again, it goes back to the very first point, we all have a reputation, good or bad. People have perceptions of us. And again, I want to be clear. It's not about being, I'm everybody's friend. That's not, I will say, and I think Mike can say this, the higher you go up, I still have great friends, but there's tough decisions you have to make that sometimes impact those friends. So it's not about, being buddy, but your reputation, you do have to have, the administration. If you're going into a supervisory rank or lieutenant, the higher you go up, the more your job is to, one, take care of the people, but then two, do the will of the chief in the department, in the city that you work for, or the county that you work for, or whatever agency you work for, that you're kind of implementing the policies, the procedures, and those wills. And if your perception or people perceive you is that you're one of those that's very quick to kind of, shoot every idea down or something like that, that's not going to bode well for you. If I can add one other thing, though, the other thing that doesn't bode well is if, say, you are a rock star, but everybody on your team doesn't like you because you're the best at it. And then if people don't meet your standard, it's that feeling in the room like, oh, I mean, I've seen it. I've seen people that are great at a particular assignment, and they're like, hey, man, if I have a homicide tomorrow, I want that detective leading the case. But I don't know if that translates to that person actually being a supervisor, because they can't form a team or they treat their teammates pretty bad. And that's a reputation that they have. So it's kind of twofold. What's your reputation as far as supporting the organization? Because like it or not, even if you have bad leaders that you think are bad leaders, and part of your job as a leader is to help them succeed. And then flip side, if you're great at what you do, but you can't carry a team, then that reputation is going to come into the room as well.
Yeah, those are great points. Mike, anything on that? Hey, this agency screwed up and I'm the person to fix it. And
I think a lot of people kind of short circuit their chances for promotion, not because they lack intelligence or capability or the skills to be a great leader. What they lack is the character. They lack the thing that it's not about you, it's about your team. It's about your organization. It's about the community, the city, the county, the people that you serve. I have seen people really implode on that. And I've also coached people through it. I've seen people fail at that type of thing and come into an interview and say, I noticed this problem, this problem, this problem. This is how I would go about solving it. You can say that in a constructive way that is helpful and that will be received positively by your agency's leadership, or you can say it in a snarky way, which will just be seen as kind of juvenile and not befitting of someone worthy of promotional consideration. So if it's like a comment that you might put on social media, like a snarky Facebook post or something, there's no place for that in an oral board. In an oral board, you say, I noticed this problem. I don't know how it came to be, but I think there is a better way to do it. And this is one idea that I have. Of course, there might be other ways, but the way that we're going to solve this problem, it could be anything, what kind of equipment you have, what kind of training programs your agency has, how your teams are deployed and patrol, how many on this shift and that shift, could be anything. But without going in and say, I don't know whose idea this was, but it's not working and we need to fix it. Well, it could be the person that you're talking to. It could be that person's idea or somebody that person has a great deal of respect for. So there's a right way and a wrong way, and character really comes out with questions like that. So I would say invest in yourself, invest in reading good books, associating with people who have good attitudes, and not just get your perspectives on how the world works just from your law enforcement organization. As great as it may be, there's a broad world out there and there's a lot of perspectives to consider. So the broader perspective you have, the more education you have, the more well-read you are, the more successful you'll be in the promotion process.
Yeah, those are great points. Really seeing the world outside of your own. And I think, we all get kind of insulated in our cocoon. We spend so much time at work that we think, well, within the walls of my agency is the only thing there is in police work. But once you really start getting out there, maybe working on a task force assignment or working with other agencies or attending classes with other folks from other agencies and getting a broad perspective, and maybe getting involved with things that don't really float your boat. If you're a tactical guy, can you go get involved with some investigative stuff? If you're an investigative stuff, is there something you could do, out with the community services type of thing? And one thing that was successful for me when I was trying to get promoted to a sergeant is I tried to get sort of my tentacles, like an octopus. I tried to get my tentacles involved in everything. And in so much that one time I was at a meeting with some private industry group, and in walks the chief, and he goes, "Oh, I didn't know you were going to be here." I said, "Oh, I'm on the board," kind of thing. And it was a good thing, and I think maybe getting involved in a lot of stuff, opening up your perspective, If you're a hard charging canine swatologist, kind of, dude that likes rappelling and all that stuff, great. Um, can you go get involved in an admin assignment? And I know that sounds like the kiss of death, right? You don't want to sit in a building and look at budgets and grants and stuff like that. But is there something you could do to get involved with that, to take yourself out of your comfort zone? Because read any book about learning, read any book about improving your own performance, make it stick, the science of learning, peak, the science of expertise. Read any of those modern books and you'll see that growth happens when you're just a little bit outside your comfort zone, right? Just like lifting weights. If you're just lifting the same amount of weights every day, you're not going to see a dramatic improvement. You lift just a little bit, or wow, that's a little bit harder than I'd like it right now. That's where the muscles start breaking down and rebuilding. Same thing with the mind, same thing with your career. Can you get just a little bit out of your comfort zone and be able to walk in and show the folks that are on this panel here, when you walk in there, hey, you may only know me as sort of this, but I've actually been involved in this, and that. Because when you get promoted to sergeant, lieutenant, what have you, you are naturally going to get involved with a lot of other stuff. And some of it's not going to be the most exciting, sexy, fun thing that you find interesting, right? As a patrol officer or a patrol sergeant, I supervised folks that thought they thought traffic was really interesting. And for me, I can't understand it. There's nothing that interests me about traffic, right? I'm the guy that used to pay another officer to take a injury accident report. Hey, I'll buy you lunch. Can you take this? This doesn't make any sense. Well, I got to learn a little bit about that. And if this officer really finds that interesting for whatever reason, I got to help them. What can we do to get you involved with the traffic team, or maybe get you to a training class, or let's position you so you can get kind of the experience you want. The more you can do that now and start looking outside of yourself, the better. Mike talked a little bit about, how to approach what if things are screwed up, right? Let's not sugarcoat it. There's a lot of problems in law enforcement, and your agency, just like every other agency, has a lot of problems. Is there a way to approach that humbly, more professionally, avoiding the comments like Mike said, which are pithy, that might be like a slogany comment? I like what you said there, Mike. If it looks like it would make a good Facebook post, don't mention it. That's a pretty good one. So I want to move on to another question. That was one question. Dear God, we really hit that one. If you have any questions for the panel, feel free to put them in the Q&A box and we'll kind of monitor them and work them in. We'll do just a strict Q&A at the end, but if something comes up and you want us to address it now, throw it in the question box. For this reason, if you don't want your name said, just say, hey, don't say my name, because maybe there's some other folks from your agency on or something like that. But here's the reason. These are people that are not in your agency, right? Most likely. And they're going to give you, they don't have a dog in this race. They're just going to give you 100% their honest feedback. So the next question that I am thinking, because I think that it will be within the minds of the folks on the call right now, is each of you talked about getting involved with the explorers or getting involved with something outside of their norm. Does that mean that if you're a promotional candidate, you got to, quote, play the game, drink the Kool-Aid? What's another word? They become a company man or a company woman. Does that mean that you're going to basically just have to sell your soul? That's another way that folks talked about that. Is that real? Is that what folks have to do? They just have to become a company guy or girl?
Well, if you don't mind me going, Scott, I mean, you have to be a part of the family, be a part of the team. So, in leadership roles, I've always thought super highly of if my sheriff showed up at an event, or the lieutenant, or anybody, and just even if they're there for a few minutes, but just the mere fact of them showing up, it really shows that they're part of the team. And it brings the wholesomeness together. I mean, we mentioned it a little bit. You have to be able to form a team, and I think that's part of it. So, you said drink the Kool-Aid and company man and some of those negatives to it, but there's definitely a line where I show up to things, or you need to show up to things to show that, this is part of you. You're all in.
Well, some folks are saying, hey, be honest with that question. So I think I just touched a nerve with at least somebody there. That's a real common thing. And if I'm an officer and I'm looking to get promoted, and I see maybe some of the folks that are above me are not the most the greatest folks in the world, and maybe they're kind of screwed up, or they've done some screwed up things, and I'm thinking, is that what I have to do to get promoted? Do I have to change myself? Do I have to become something I'm not? In other words, if this is a meritocracy, I should just be awarded this position based on the things that I've achieved. And in other words, let my resume speak for itself. This is about police work, and I'm a great, police officer. I should get that position. Your thoughts?
Well, you're both right. To answer the question that came up in the chat, being a leader is about leading people. It's not about, making the most widgets, making the most arrests, or having the best issuance rate on cases you submit for prosecution. It's about how you can lead other people to achieve those same things. So yes, if there's events that you can go to, then you should make an effort to go to them. Doesn't mean you have to give up your work-life balance. Doesn't mean you have to sacrifice time with your family, at least not very much time. There's a way to integrate it into your work, I think, and that'll be different for everybody's situation. One thing that I noticed, they give those DIS surveys, where you come up in 4 quadrants, based on your personality assessment, and they do that a lot at supervision and management schools. And over the years, I've seen my own score kind of go from the introvert side over towards the extrovert side. I don't think it'll ever be over in that top left corner in the extroverted, hyperactive mole. That's just not me. But I've had to make an effort at that. And I shared that sentiment early in my career. So, I work hard every day. I'm not gonna go to this thing. I'm not gonna go to this social event. Maybe if it's happening on the beat while I'm working, I'll swing by on duty and make an appearance, but probably not. Well, after a while, I realized that sometimes work gets done in ways that people don't think that work gets done, like being able to talk to the lieutenant, at a work-related social event and just get some insight and share some ideas that they probably wouldn't be willing to do sitting in the office on a Wednesday morning, but they might be willing to do, at a Friday evening social event or a happy hour type event. As long as everything is kept professional, you have to keep that line drawn, but you have to do a little bit more than just be a great police officer to be a great leader.
Right. There's a common thought process that this is a meritocracy, and I don't think I would be shocking anybody by saying that not all of promotional processes are solely based on merit, and the merit that you think is kind of what should be awarded. In other words, there is I hate to use the word, but there is a bit of a contest game process, maybe be another word. There is a bit of a process, and that process has rules. Some of those rules are advertised and spoken, and some of them are perhaps unspoken. I think that's a reality. And when one is playing any kind of game, participating in a contest, participating in a selection process, whatever you want to call it, you've got to understand and abide by whatever rules there are. Now, listen, I'm not going to tell you that there's no politics involved in promotions and there's no favoritism. No, I think that would be tone deaf and naive for me to say. So you as a leader, as perhaps a tactician, as someone who takes your career very seriously, and anything you're going to do, you're going to approach this process by first understanding the rules, understanding the constraints, understanding how decisions are honestly made, and lean into those things. And if you're going to say, well, that's BS and things ought to be this way that I think, and walk into a process And I knew a guy who proudly announced, I don't play games and I don't study for tests. So he would walk into the promotional test that we were all taking without studying, and sometimes he did okay, often he didn't. And it all just kind of begged the question, why do that? You know, there is something about getting out of your comfort zone, and if you see it as, I don't want to be a company man, well, it doesn't mean you need to get a tattoo with your agency's name on it, or the chief's name, or something like that, or kind of go around and be a sycophant and kiss people's behind. I don't see those as being equal, but I think you do need to, like Mike said, embrace the fact that you're in the people business. So you as a leader are going to have people coming to you with people issues. You're going to, you might be a great street cop and a great, tactician and SWAT guy and incident commander and all that kind of stuff, and run the hot, sexy calls, or you're going to be a great investigator. That's all good. But you're going to be supervising people who have children's, and the children have issues, and they have birthdays, and they need to get time off for the surgery, and there's just a lot of stuff that's going to come in there. And the more you can just be a people person, I think you'll have an easier time, one, explaining to people how you're a great candidate, two, actually being that great candidate.
Hey, can I throw my perspective in that question? Because this is a hard question, and I agree with I think everybody on this panel would say, you call it politics or whatnot, that does exist, and in some agencies it's to the extreme, and others not so much. But here's my point: if your department's got some major initiative and you want to be in a supervisory position or a position of leadership, and you've got zero participation in that, even if it's like, well, it's not my assignment, but say there's like some new community program, here's what the doubt that it can leave if you decide like, hey, I'm not going to participate in that. And again, I'm not talking about grabbing your flag and look how great I'm participating. That's not what I'm talking about. I'm talking about, are you doing something to help further the major initiative of your chief or your department in any of the little way? Working on a narco unit, but they're doing community outreach. I'm not saying you go in your narco unit, but are you at least in line with this major initiative that's being pushed out? If you're not, you're going to have problems overcoming that in the panel, unless you're able to explain like, yes, I haven't been able to do this, but like haven't been going to these, but this is what I'm doing to try to further this initiative of the department. That's one thing. But here, just from my perspective, a deputy chief, if I'm going to promote somebody, we'll stick to the supervisor level. At the end of the day, what I do want to know, they can disagree with me. And I appreciated that if somebody come in my office and disagree with me. But if I've just kicked out a policy because it was a demand of the community or my city council or my board or whatever, I want to know that if I promote you to supervisor or to lieutenant, that in graveyards, if you're the shift supervisor on graveyards and you're discussing that policy, it's going to be, you're pushing that forward, you're moving that forward. And it's not like, oh, this is crap from above and all. I can't have that. So if your non-participation in any of these things is creating that sense of doubt, yeah, but in the middle of the night when nobody's around, are they going to be pushing forward these initiatives? Are they going to be helpful or are they going to be hurtful? And if you're choosing not to participate for whatever reason, and it's creating that hurtful side that I'm not sure that they're really, then that's an obstacle you're going to have to overcome. Because like it or not, as a deputy chief, I knew I put out policies or procedures that were not always well received. Hopefully I did my legwork as a leader to get those. But I want to know at the end of the day that my lieutenants and my supervisors were communicating that clearly and setting forth that mission of like, hey, we're gonna move forward with this and try to accomplish that. And I need to know that if I'm going to promote you or anybody on a panel is going to promote you, that you have that ability to even take things that you don't like, and I've lived that as well, and still say, you know what, though, this is what's been assigned to me. How am I going to actually make this work and put it into play? And if you don't do that, that's going to be a problem.
Yeah, the just think of your, if you're listening to this, imagine you've been promoted to the position you want, okay? You're in a leadership position and you have things that are very important to you, and you are telling your team, hey, I want you to go out and do this, whatever it is. You make it up. How do you want those teammates to receive it, to talk about your you know suggestions, your mission? How do you want people to operate now that you've told people what to do? Well, you want people to be supportive even if they don't like it. You want people to follow your directions even if they don't like it. That's the very same thing that your current bosses feel. That's the very same thing that your chief, your sheriff, your whomever feels. And just like you want to be received well when you have a great idea, there are lots of folks above you that they think they have great ideas, because in over 20 years of doing this job, I found very few people had malintent. There was a few, but I think it's pretty few people have malintent. And they're like, you know what? I want to put this policy out there to really screw the cops. That's what I want to do. I really want to screw these young cops over and screw patrol. Let's now sometimes people have different opinions than maybe I would have had, but I don't know if it was necessarily malintent. And you can be a vigorous debater, you can be a vigorous, have your own opinions about that. But when it comes right down to it, you're going to need to execute what those people need executed. If you're saying, I would like to join your team, I'd like to get up there where you guys are, and having more influence and making bigger decisions and having maybe a team of my own. Um, the question came up about assessment centers. Assessment centers, perhaps going to an assessment center and interviewing with people who don't know you. And so maybe what we've been talking about, getting a good reputation. Here I am, I'm going to an oral interview, and it's folks from other agencies. Maybe there's a community member there. And how do I interview with them and tell them how great I am when they don't even know me? They have no idea who I am. One thought I had, just a quick tangible takeaway, is avoid jargon. Avoid saying that, I did 12 years on ABC, and then I did 5 years over at, DGF. And then I got 1,400 code 99s. And then and you're talking in codes, and these other people are like, those codes don't mean anything to me. The citizen is going, I don't know what any of that stuff means. You basically shouldn't be talking. Just tell us what it is. I did 5 years on CST, which is a street level narcotics team, and we're responsible for these things. And I think what that brought me is don't just avoid any kind of jargony things. But what's your guys' thought on assessment centers, maybe interviewing with people that don't know you?
Well, I think one thing, Scott, a shameless plug, I guess, with this coaching program. You sign up for whatever time block, say an hour. Sorry, boss, but I usually go over. I take some time with he or she, and really, I have to draw that out, right? So it's part of the almost the assessment center is talking to me, a complete stranger, and I'm like, all right, tell me about yourself. And we get these big alpha dogs that just don't want to brag, or maybe brag too much, and using all this jargon and lingo. I kind of, the whole time of the last coaching session I did, I was scratching out everything I could. And then I'm like, okay, let's start. And whether we jumped into a closing, or the question of why do you want to be a sergeant, a deputy, or why do you want this specialty team unit? I'm like, okay, all that stuff you told me about yourself is nowhere in, say, your verbal resume or in your closing or anything. So part of that is, it's huge to be able to talk to, a kind of like a stranger, to get it all out and get it on, for me to get it on paper and to reformat it, and really to work with the client. I think it helps, because we all know, I think we all could agree, the worst people me personally could interview in front of is people that I know. It's just very, very difficult. So I think part of this, it helps, it's like kind of, I don't want to say like a confession, but talking to a stranger and really, really getting it out. I think it helps. Huge.
Yeah, those are great points, Lloyd. And I think before we go on a break, I just want to make sure I get this out. These assessment centers are a part of many processes. We use them out of county, outside agency, whatever you want to call it. I've been to some where they take great pains to make sure that the assessors come from at least 100 miles away, for example, so that there's no chance that, or at least not a good chance that anybody will know each other. But that's just a part of the promotional process. It's still going to be your agency that's going to make the final decision about who's being promoted. So you have to know the audience in the assessment center. You might not know who the people are going to be on the assessment center, but you should be able to figure out somehow, are they all going to be cops? Is it going to be someone from the community? If it is someone from the community, see if you can find out who that might be. So you're not saying something that's just automatically a trigger for them, if you'll forgive the phrase. And then in that assessment center, you have to score high. I mean, you're going to have to hit all those points. You're going to have to make them check all the little boxes on the form that they have in front of them that shows that you have the knowledge needed. And that's a skill in of itself, good interviewing in that context. But then you're also going to, no matter what that assessment center does, if the assessment center tells the chief, this is the best guy, and the chief knows better, the chief is not going to make that promotion. Depends on what the civil service rules are in your individual jurisdictions, I realize, and how it works. But I don't think anybody's is so strict that it's just going to be some outside panel is going to pick and choose who the leaders are of an organization. So just realize that it's part of the process. And then one little tip is, if it's outside agency people or people from community organizations, watch the assumptions you make about those organizations. You might have read a story in the newspaper or something, and of course we all know that stories about police agencies that are published in reputable newspapers are always completely accurate, so we can take them exactly what they say as if. So don't make a comment about, well, I know in the San Diego Sheriff's Department you've been having this issue with XYZ. No, you don't. You don't know anything about the San Diego Sheriff's Department. I know about the San Diego Sheriff's Department, but you don't. You just stick to what you know about your agency. Just a little tip there. Don't try to become too familiar or make assumptions about things that really the people in front of you know more about than you might know.
Smart, really smart. And if there is a community member on your panel, one thing to be cognizant of is, are you interviewing in a way that the interviewer is going to be hearing you? Are you meeting the interviewer where they are? So if I'm conducting if I'm teaching a class and I'm teaching in front of a bunch of cops, I can use humor, codes. I can, I know kind of how cops are responding. If I'm asked to go hop on a call with a community member, or I'm doing something in front of members of the public, well, obviously, I'm not going to be using the same kinds of humor, the same kinds of codes. I really want to meet the audience where they are, in much the same way we talk to children, different than we speak to our seniors, the elderly. We talk to our work colleagues different than we might talk to someone we don't know. Same goes true for an interviewer. Am I meeting the audience where they are? And so when someone says something along the lines of, what are the big issues facing law enforcement right now? I can think of a few right now, and I don't know that I would lead with, well, it's our spike strips. It's really our spike strips, because I've noticed that the spike strips that we use to stop cars right now, now they have a 2-inch spike, and I have done the research on this one that's got a 2.5-inch spike, and that's really going to stop cars quicker, and that's really the big issue there. And another thing about some equipment that I've been thinking about, if that's what you're leading with, something so granular, something so in the grand scheme of things, not the most important stuff, you're going to basically lose your audience, right? Don't be tone deaf. Don't talk negatively about other agencies, but by the same token, let's show that you kind of get it. Like, I'm kind of in tune with the stuff that's going on, both internally in my own agency and externally with our law enforcement industry. I'm going to be hitting kind of the hot topics of the day and being able to keep a meaningful conversation about that. Listen, I think spike strips are cool too. I want to stop, cars that are running from us just as much as you do, but I don't know that that's a big issue that I would be leading with when I'm talking to people that don't know me, that they might be thinking, is this all this guy thinks about? Is equipment? That's the big issues he's thinking. They're like, well, no, if you knew me, you'd know that I'm into that other stuff too. It's like, man, I have to give you the best possible answers there. Okay, gents. Anything before we take a break?
Well, yeah, I just want to add 2 quick points. Sorry.
Please.
Bad instructor folk. Hey, we'll take a break, but
No.
First off, remember our last question, we talked about a lot of our response was talking about internally, working with others within your agency. I just want to throw a plug in there. Don't forget about your community, because I teach all over this nation, and I can tell you there's not one department I've been to that they're not doing some sort of community engagement. So how are you even involved in that? And I don't know, I'm just throwing that out there. So when you're preparing, the community's a huge portion. But one of the things I want to talk about the assessment center and not knowing, just give you a little, recognize that every candidate, especially for like supervisor or lieutenant, every candidate is coming in there with experience. I know I've already said that, but every candidate's been in special assignments and all that. So as you're trying to talk to this panel, recognize that everybody that's interviewing that day, I'm going to hear about their resume, and the resumes are going to be different, but they're going to be pretty similar in tenure. So I'm not saying you don't say that stuff. You should, maybe 3 to 5 minutes, make sure you're covering the experience that you've had. But that's not the selling point. Really, the selling point comes on what has that created in you? Who are you? What leadership qualities, traits, skill sets are you bringing to whatever job? And if a panel doesn't know you, man, that's a blank canvas, because I've done both, man. As I've gone up, I've had to interview for the people that know me. And then I know, like, hey, there's this big elephant in the room that I'm going to have to address about me. But when they don't know me, then it's my job to really sell them what Dan Flippo do I want them to know. And it's got to be honest and with humility, but I want them to know, like, hey, when I get promoted to this position, these are all the strengths and characteristics that I'm bringing because of my experience, because of my self-seeking, the student that, I'm always, like we talked about, reading books, the studying and all that. But so when I start and you put the stripes on my sleeve tomorrow, this is what you're getting. It's not like I've got this big learning curve. This supervisory stuff I'm gonna have to learn, but man, at the core, these are my strengths that I'm bringing. And that's really, when I see candidates go like that, and I can, when I'm sitting across the panel, I go, man, that person sounds like they're really good at mentoring others, and they're able to collaborate and create a team. And they're able, when I can write that stuff down, when I don't know them from anybody that I might, that's what's impressive. And so your homework ahead of time is you thinking about, how am I going to basically sell myself as far as the strengths and characteristics that I have? What am I going to tell these people that don't know me at the end of the day? This is what they're getting. When they promote me or move me forward, this is what they're getting. And that is, I've seen people completely miss that mark, where they just talk about, well, man, again, it sounds like they were a great FTO. I have no idea, though, if they're going to be a great supervisor. So I just wanted to throw that in.
Excellent. And I think there was a couple of great questions that came in about assessment centers and that type of thing. I think one of the ones that I kind of keyed up on was Ezekiel asked, thoughts on departments promoting the best test taker with maybe low leadership abilities versus the best actual leader who may be a lower or have lower test taking capabilities. When I read that question, that comes up all the time, right? Is this a good test taker? What if we had a candidate walk in who's an excellent interviewer, an excellent test taker, and they do phenomenal in a process, and they don't necessarily have all the stuff that we'd like them to have when they get promoted? Well, 2 things. Is this testing process the be-all, end-all predictor of leadership? No. Testing processes, just like anything, were created based on some job relevant parameters. So somebody somewhere decided this is the desirable qualities of this position. This is how we're going to test for it. Now, is all of that science-based? Is all of that evidence-based? Well, probably not. Would all of it stand up to a rigorous scientific study and predictive analysis of who's a great leader and who's not? Probably not. A lot of the stuff that we do is based on best practices from many, many years ago. In other words, is there anything really that different about the way we're testing for sergeant in this year versus how we did it 30 years ago? Probably not. Um, but, but is that an option to not do well on the test? You know, is there, would it be okay to not do good on the test, perhaps not do great in the interview, but tell everybody, just remind them, hey, just to let you know, I'm the best person for this position. Now, I granted I didn't do well on these tests, but I'm the best person. Is the panel or the chief or the sheriff going to go, oh, okay, good point, good point? Nope, no, probably not a reality. So back to what I was saying earlier, if you're going to participate in what amounts to a contest, a game, a process, you've got to play by the rules that they, whoever they may be, have laid out for you. So if part of the selection process is that I score the highest on the test, whatever the test is, I'm going to have to meet that, right? If you're trying out for SWAT and part of the SWAT test is running 2 miles and you walk in, I just did a job relevant study that says no SWAT cops ran 2 miles in the last, 30 years. This is BS. We shouldn't have to do that. That's why I did poorly on the run. The SWAT commander is going to go, that's nice. Next, we got to play by the rules that are laid out for us. Anything on that question there, gents?
Well, just like leadership skills can be developed, test taking and interviewing skills can be developed. So whatever you're lacking, you need to work on it. And if you're a great test taker, great interviewer, however you got there, good for you. But you're a poor leader, well, get some coaching, get some mentoring, and become a better leader. And if you're a great leader, but you fall flat on your face at test time or interview time, work on those skills, practice, and you will get better. You may not ever be the best, but you will get better, and it'll lead you to success.
Yeah, that's a good point, Mike. Sometimes folks walk into the oral interview and I don't know anyone. I don't know that I've met anyone that enjoys the process of taking a panel oral interview. It's nerve-wracking. It's awkward, right? Whether you know them or don't know them. But certainly you should be practicing and rehearsing that just like any other skill. You're a great leader. You're an excellent officer. Well, how'd you do that? Purposeful practice, research, training. Okay. Are you doing all of those things to improve the testing process? When's the last time you practiced taking a test, taking an assessment center, sitting in an oral interview, being concise, all that stuff? Obviously, if you're listening to this, you're a person who's interested in improving your performance. Otherwise, you wouldn't be here. So we're trying to give you some nuggets here, but there's a lot of things you can do to improve the oral interview, and make sure you're doing something, right? Make sure you're doing something to improve your performance now. Dan, Lloyd, anything on that?
Yeah, I'll just say, you also got to understand, like I mentioned HR in the background, because I set up our promotional test, prior to the test even happening, like we announce the test, the whole process has to be approved by the department. And they'll say like, hey, how much are you going to weigh the written proportion versus the assessment panel versus all that? And those are the rules. And what they're trying to do is add fairness to the process, that everybody can come in here and that different things are weighted. So that's one of it. So as far as like written tests or something like that, you got to do your homework, because that's part of the process that's chosen before. Hopefully, I can tell you, I was constantly looking at different testing out, like how do we get what we want now? Like how to really, you can have, I remember one of my tests was, what's a felony theft of avocados? It's like, man, I don't know. Is that really what a sergeant needs to know? But those tests are made, and so you have to do your homework. If it's the written test, if they have a written test and that's scored and you've done poorly on it, then every process I've seen, there's been material presented out there like, hey, here's what you kind of need to study. And if you're not studying on that, and that's where you're falling short, then that's, again, you have to put in your homework. There's nothing, on the oral interviews, we're going to go into what makes a good oral interview. I can tell you, I've been sitting on the other side of the panel, I've been very frustrated because I've seen a candidate when the test is announced and you hear that person applied, you go, man, it's theirs to lose, whatever, because of where they're at in their career and how things are going. and then they just completely bomb the oral interview. And I'm not saying, but I want to go back. If you heard something that the undersheriff said that Mike said, is he said like, hey, at the beginning he was more introverted and now he's more extroverted. That took work. I can guarantee that took work on his part to get there. And so if you're struggling with oral interviews, then you've got to put in your work. And if you're just like, well, it's not a fair testing process because I don't, man, I get it. I can tell you as the leader that's has to also hold a testing process within confines. Man, if you can't pass an oral panel, there's nothing I can do for you. If that score isn't 70% or 80%, whatever your department says, me as a leader, I may want to be like, man, I think you're the shining horse and I want to promote you. But if you don't get through this process, there's nothing I can do except for maybe help you. But if I'm going to be making the promotional decisions, there's a limit that that person can do. So do your homework.
Yeah, and I think maybe as law enforcement officers, we get stuck in a little rut here, and we're thinking, well, it's not fair, and this is all rigged. They're going to give it to so and so anyway, and it's like, well, saying something's not fair. When you hear your kids say, oh, it's not fair, what do you say? Well, life's not fair. When you hear people complain, that's not fair. Well, okay, and I don't know that if we're going to be in dealing with humans, right? Because our organizations are made of humans. There's always going to be favoritism and politics and that kind of stuff. And that really goes with any organization, whether you're in private industry, whether you're in law enforcement or any career field. At some point, we're going to have to stop fighting the process, and we're going to have to start abiding by the rules that are set and just kind of ace all of them. So if part of the step to getting to what you want is passing this oral interview, you can spin your wheels and attack the process and say how this is, garbage and this is all about test takers. Hey man, I'm with you, right? Just because you're a good test taker, we're not applying for position of test taker, right? So think about it. He got really good on the test, so we gave him the position. Well, that would make sense if we were applying for best test taker, but we're applying for sergeant. You got to know this and that. I get it, and I am with you. However, we can argue about it all day long and kind of stamp our feet about it. That is not going to change. So why don't we control what we can control? And there are certain things, as opposed to looking at it from a victim mentality, look at it from a leadership mentality. What can I control? Here's the things you can control. You know what the process involves, right? You have to go in and sit for an oral interview. I bet you can predict at least 50% of the questions that will be on that test, such as, why are you the best candidate? What do you know about the position? What have you done to prepare, right? Those are softball questions that are definitely going to appear there. What are you doing to prepare to execute that question, to answer that question concisely, professionally, in a way that communicates the message that you want to communicate? You control the stuff you can, forget about the stuff you can't, because that's not going away. When you get promoted to sergeant, you're going to have to do things that you don't want to do, and it shouldn't be this way. That's not going to change either. Stop worrying about the process and just learn how to execute what they want so that you can get what you want, right? Lloyd, anything on that question?
Yeah, for sure. I would venture to say that we have more than 50% of the questions, the softball ones. I mean, we have a lot. Just from my own experience, from the people that I've coached to the leadership in this virtual room, we probably have almost all the questions. And we know what's the last question going to be. Do you have anything else to add, right? What's that, the cue for, or closing? So those are the things we totally could prepare for and knock out of the park. It just takes getting off your butts and working at it. I mean, we could sit here and complain about the used car salesman that takes the test and the oral boards and they knock it out of the park every time. I've seen the question in there, but they're a terrible leader. Well, okay, what are we doing to combat that? Part of it is seeing all the participants here today. It's a step in the right direction. It's to make yourself better. We know what they're going to ask us. It's nerve-wracking, but you have to prepare for it. So I like what you said about the victim mentality. You need to get after it. It's not going to be a surprise. I mean, there's some stuff I could help you with, or we could help you with, and there's some stuff that might be, totally based on things that are going on in your apartment. They might ask you that I don't know, or we don't know, but we could work through that. But the ones that we know that are going to be probably more than 50% of that oral board, we could just totally crush it as long as you work hard at it.
Right. And if you want to change things, you want to change the way stuff's done, you've got a better idea for how promotion should be made and whatnot. That the more influence you have, the better, right? So if you can rise up in rank and be put in a position to make those types of changes, well, hey, great, right? That's what you can do for everybody. But in order to get there, you're going to have to participate in the process as it is laid out today. And don't waste your time thinking about it. Don't waste your time arguing what ought to be, and this person is this and that person is that. Just, that's all great. It just turns into gripes, and it's not going to help you. It's going to actually help the other people succeed because you're spending so much time worrying about the process and attacking that. And this person over here is like, good on you. I'm going to be practicing. I'm going to be rehearsing for this. So just look at this like a scenario, a tactical scenario, just how you're going to outwit this thing, right? You're going to outwit this by understanding the rules, being the best you can at participating in the process put in front of you, and just learning how to be really, really good at all the steps. So oral interview, assessment centers, tactical scenario, which that one trips up a lot of people. We'll talk a little bit about that. But one of the questions that came up, what have you done to prepare for this position during the course of your career? That is something that is definitely going to be on there, right? What have you done to prepare? What are your guys' thoughts on answering that question? What have you done to prepare for this position?
I kind of talked about it briefly. One, if that's the opening question, 3 minutes or less on your resume, and then realistically take a deep dive on what characters, strengths, leadership skills, whatever label you want to put on them. Again, that setting that tone of this is who I am. If I'm interviewing, I want them to know this about Dan Flippo that is going to fulfill this position and need. And so we covered that a little bit, but I always encourage people, then go stand in front of your mirror, and you don't want to have a rehearsed speech that seems like not genuine, but you also want to be able to, how do I get this message across clearly and succinctly? And I can pretty much every interview I've been, and remember, I've been in hundreds, and that's just the reality. That question exists, and it's usually one of the first questions. So if you know it's coming, practice it. Like, what do I want to get across? How do I want to open this interview if it's an opener, or if it's the closer that they never did ask that question, but now anything you want to add? Well, yes, I want you to know that, these are the strengths that I have because of this position, and then go on to that. And that's where the homework has to be done. If you just admit it, you're a horrible interviewer, or you have a hard time talking about yourself, talk to your spouse, your significant other, your kid. Practice that and get that so that you're comfortable. And it's not so much we're all going to be nervous. Every interview I did, I was nervous. So it's not going to necessarily be like Abraham Lincoln giving the Gettysburg Address and just completely, flawless. I may be nervous, but I have to remember how I can clearly concisely communicate that message of who I am and the skill sets that I have. And if you practice that, everybody I know that I've talked to, they usually, that really sets up a good tone for the rest of the interview.
It makes sense. And maybe if I'm asked the question, what have you done to prepare for this assignment? The first thing I want to think about is, okay, what is the assignment? And what can I say that is relevant to the people asking the questions? What can I say that is going to meet those interviewers where they are, right? If I'm interviewing for a position on a auto theft task force, I'm going to answer that in a way that is relevant to that position. If I'm interviewing for the position of sergeant, I want to communicate what I've done to prepare in a way that is relevant. So as opposed to just saying, well, I read the books, I read the job description on the Human Resources website, and I practiced oral interviewing. Okay, those all might be true. Is that really like hard-hitting stuff? Because the thing to remember, to give you just a little bit of confidence walking into that interview, is it is your interview. Stop looking at it as it is their interview where they are asking the questions and I got to meet their mark. No way. This is your interview. You get to answer the questions how you would like to answer them. You get to choose what you want to do. It's a position of power. We're asking you, hey, what have you done to prepare for the position of sergeant? Now, you could tell us, kind of things that are not really that interesting. You practiced oral interviewing, you read the books. Yeah, everybody did that. Is there something you can say that not only is true on what you did to practice or to prepare, but also is meaningful to the assignment that you want, right? What have I done to prepare? It would be great if you can answer, well, I can tell you it's not, I didn't start preparing for this the minute the job posting came out 6 months ago. I can tell you that. Actually, I've spent my career preparing for this position in a variety of ways. Now, let me list them for you, right? You can work in your leadership stuff, how you've been leading a team, or you were an FTO, and being an FTO, you wrote evaluations, you supervised an employee, you coached and mentored. Hey, that sounds a lot like Sergeant. You can answer your thing any way you want. It doesn't have to be, okay, I did this and that. No way, man. I want to show you how the things I've been doing to prepare are super relevant to this position. I'm already a leader. I just want you to give me the formal trappings of leadership. I'm already doing the leadership stuff. I just need those stripes on my arm so that I can open a few doors, be better positioned to influence.
So if you don't mind there, Scott, one thing it totally brought to mind is when you're sitting at that oral panel, what are the panelists doing? Well, let me show you, right? Trying to write down everything that you say. So you really have to get your message across, almost feed them the bullet points or the home runs that you want to get on the paper, because, right here on this paper, it says Lloyd McKinnon, and, I want to hear stuff about leadership and the bullet points that I want to convey to the panelists. The second thing is, to everybody in this webinar, is if you can get yourself onto a panel of any type, go to HR and go say, hey, I want to be on the next Explorer One legal clerk, deputy sheriff officer. For one, they're going to be like, are you crazy? And then they'll be like, okay, yeah, we'll sign you up, because they're always looking for people. And you will learn so much from sitting on anyone. I don't care if it's for underwater basket weaver. You will sit there and you will pick up tips. And throughout my career, I've always tried to sit on as many panels as I can just to learn these skills. And I've sat on ones most recently for military academy and high school kids. And some of these kids just knocked it out of the park. I mean, they prepared better than I've seen deputies prepare for sergeant, or even just people trying to become deputy sheriffs or officers. So it really has to do with that preparation. And call me crazy, but you have to try to sit on some oral board panels. The only oral board that you've ever been on is your own, then you're doing yourself the disservice, for sure.
That's really smart. What a great way to put yourself in the position of an interviewer to actually do it, right? Become that interviewer and think about not only what the candidates are answering, but what is resonating with you. Lloyd brought up a great tangible interviewing point. The interviewer has a pen in their hand and a piece of paper, right? Generally, and they're having to take notes. How can you speak in a way that lends itself to note taking, right? So if I were to say, if the panel asked me, why would you like to be, what have you done to prepare to be a sergeant? Well, let me tell you about that. It all started when I was 4 years old. And at 4 years old, this fire truck came by, and the fire truck came by and they waved at me. And, I thought that was really interesting. And so then now later that night, what is the panel thinking right now? They're thinking, where's this going? Are they going to write down 4 fire truck later and then scratch it all out and be like, what? You are telling a great story. Maybe it's the best story. It's a hard to follow story. It is an arcing story that maybe has a buildup and eventually gets to it. You got a limited amount of time. How can you speak in a way that lends itself to those that are writing? Get out of your own head, get in their head, maybe become an interviewer like Lloyd is suggesting, right? Interesting. I want to jump into another question I have for you guys, and we'll come back and hit some of the interview stuff, maybe a little bit towards the end. I know our last hour together, we want to just really hammer out interviewing, because that is it's not a real common skill with people. And so we want to talk a lot about interviewing. But the question I have for you guys is, you all come from different sized agencies, right? The panel here is all from different sized agencies. from your perspective, what are the things that candidates can do to position themselves, depending on maybe the size of agency they're in? How can a candidate just start positioning themselves through the agencies? Or any takeaways or things that you guys think that they could do right now?
I'll jump into that from a large agency perspective. In addition to all the things that we talked about, what is your and? What are all the skills that you're good at, and the plus one, and having character, come through in your interview, and being selfless and not selfish. But you also need, in a large agency, it's helpful to have broad support. So that means whether it's a diversity of assignments, or you put yourself in a position where you can affect things throughout the organization. So maybe as a training officer, you came up with a new training program for whatever it is, and that got published and is now the standard for your entire organization. Or you're on the SWAT team, and you are not only the agency subject matter expert on sniper craft, but also you're recognized regionally as a leader in that. And so leaders in your organization will, the chief will call the sheriff and say, hey, can we borrow Deputy Smith to help our agency develop this program, because he's really good at that. That doesn't mean you have to jump assignments every 6 months and try to get all over the place, but it means doing a little bit more than just what affects your individual station or your unit. We have 20 different stations scattered throughout the county, and a bunch of support divisions that are in separate buildings. And if a person could be doing a great job in their unit, but if the only person who knows about it is his or her captain, for example, when all the captains have to get together and evaluate who the best candidate for promotion is, it really does help if there's more than just one voice speaking on your behalf. So something to keep in mind if you happen to be from a large agency.
Yeah, that's really smart. And if you're at a large agency, it's why I think it's a great panel to have, because we've got guys from different sized agencies, not unlike the folks that are listening on this call here. Dan or Lloyd, any thoughts on positioning yourself at maybe a medium-sized agency or a smaller agency?
Definitely be well-rounded. I think we kind of talked on it earlier. If you're the subject matter expert, say you're a lifelong canine guy, and you are possibly an FTO, like where are you going in your career? Like what's going to be your wheelhouse? So, say you don't want to test for a sergeant, but you really want to be a use of force expert or DTAC, because it's all kind of carved out the same with the canine stuff. But getting that experience, say if listen, I'm just going to be canine my whole career, and then all of a sudden out of the blue, you're testing for a sergeant. So start that process, and hopefully you've already been an FTO. If not, like what have you done in the community? And I speak on canine because I was one for many years. You probably already have that community outreach stuff. You've done tons of canine demos. You've talked to tons of people. You've been at schools. You've organized them. So all that stuff, how does that translate to being a leader or being a sergeant? So it definitely helps you become more well-rounded. Like Mike said, not necessarily jumping around like you're canine one day, next day you're SWAT, and you're just going all over the place. It's kind of like where are you going with your career? But maybe stick in your wheelhouse, your level of expertise, and carve that path towards becoming a sergeant, lieutenant. I think really, really helps.
Lloyd, you mentioned canine. I think that's an interesting position. So oftentimes what happens with canine folks is they are working night shift. They're away at training, or they're dealing with the dog stuff a lot. They don't necessarily have all the time to be, self-promoting or advertising or getting involved with more administrative stuff. They try to make it to the community things where you kind of come pet the dog as much as they can, but these folks are generally busy, and they're really trying to focus, as they should, on maintaining proficiency with the dog. And that can sometimes, put you in a corner there. Like you're great as a canine, everybody loves you, but maybe you're only seen as that because typically it's a long assignment, right? You're with the length of the dog or multiple dogs. Here's some thoughts on how I would position that. If I'm a canine officer and I'm walking into a sergeant's interview, and maybe some of the people I'm interviewing with are like, isn't that the dog guy? And he works nights and he wants to be a sergeant now. Here's what I would say. You know, being a canine has given me a very interesting perspective on risk management because, as I'm aware, this is the most high liability assignment we have in the police department for this reason. It is the only assignment that involves a wild animal, right? It's the only assignment where we bring an animal with us and we ask the animal to do things for us like bite the right people. And when they don't bite the right people, we pay out dearly for it. And so having a canine, having a dog in this car has given me a special appreciation for risk management, right? This animal is primarily used in use of force situations, right? High liability situations. I understand use of force law because I have to study case law often. I understand risk management. And I can tell you, I am most proud of the things that the suspects that I didn't bite, right? You may be thinking, well, hey, what's the greatest bite you ever had? Yeah, I can tell you those stories, but I think you would find most interesting the people that I didn't bite, that I did not send this dog on because for a variety of reasons, either policy, law, it just wasn't the right thing. I was able to make that decision in tense, rapidly unfolding circumstances. And I kind of think as a sergeant, having this background, this sort of high liability assignment gives me an extra appreciation for risk management because I can imagine, Chief, that what kind of keeps you up at night is the way the police are using force. It's in all the media. It's sort of the talk of the town. I have a really special perspective on that. You know, if you can answer that question or something along those lines, that shows people that you kind of see it outside of yourself. Now, if you're going to go, listen, I am a canine, and let me tell you about the top 5 bites I have, right? There I was, man. It was awesome. The guy ran from the car. And no, don't lead with it. How that? Because that sounds like you're interviewing to be a canine officer again, right? If you're an officer you want to put in for canine, yeah, tell us about the great arrest you made, and then we'll give you canine. But if you're a canine and wants to put in for sergeant, don't interview for the position you already have, right? Position yourself. Position yourself. Dan, what do you think about positioning yourself for promotion?
Well, I'll say this from the small agency perspective, or smaller agency is one, throughout the process, you want to be able to get to that chief's interview. So we kind of go back to doing your homework and testing well. I think even for a larger, you want to get to that executive level interview at the end because they're the final say, and so you want to impress them. So for the smaller agency, you've got to get through those other panels to get to that chief's level interview. The other portion though of that is when you get to those interviews, your reputation, especially for the smaller your agency, your reputation, I know I've hit this before, but that follows you into the room. And having that understanding of how other people kind of see you or what your reputation is it may mean that you have to address some things in that interview. And I know I did that. You know, there's a question on this. One of the questions are, what about weaknesses? You know, every leader has weaknesses and strengths. Everyone, if you're really reflect on yourself, you'll know like, hey, I'm good at that, but this I'm not really good at. These are weaknesses. And you part of your weakness may be that reputation may be infused with that reputation, or we'll just answer the question as far as like a weakness goes. They'll ask you that question, and the worst way you can answer a weakness question is to try to turn it into a strength. Like the worst, I think everybody here can say, if somebody says, oh, I'm a perfectionist and I just really focus, but really what that means is at the end of the day, you get a great, well, okay, get out of here. Cause I actually want to know like, hey, are you really true to yourself and you understand what a weakness is, as far, and so, and I'm kind of adding that into that reputation thing because it goes back to the first thing we said, what is that but? And so on the smaller agency, you've got to know what that but is. And if it's something, that's your opportunity to maybe change the chief's mind. And if I can give you a quick example, I alluded to it earlier. When I was testing for lieutenant, everybody said like, hey, Flippo, even my peers at sergeants, like, hey man, this one kind of is yours to lose. You're really in line to get promoted, but how your passion comes across, you lose people in the conversation. That's something that and I'm telling you, hearing that, man, that ripped open the Band-Aid, and it wasn't good to hear, but I had to address it. And I started, again, let's go back. One, I didn't ask this when the test came out. I was asking ahead of time, trying to figure out what I can do if I'm eventually going to go to that next level, and started working on it. But when I came into the room and they asked me, I knew that I had this reputation coming from a smaller agency. I knew that everybody knew. So I had to deal with that issue honestly, and then give some real examples of how concretely I really have worked at this. And even so, I was able to say, thankfully, that, like one relationship that I had within the agency was a little strained, but through the work was able to kind of repair that. So that's the kind of questions. I mean, those are the answering this question twofold. One, smaller agency, get through the testing process. Your reputation will then come into the room with you. And if there's weaknesses that are that big elephant sitting on the table, you do need to, you need to take them on, and hopefully you've done that searching, and you can actually realistically and genuinely talk about the fixes that you've put into place and how that characteristic, it may not be 100% clearing, but you've made steps to change that.
Yeah, when I was interviewing for sergeant, they asked me that question, and I had to be very honest about it and say, sometimes the way I come across is very direct and lacks compassion for others, and even worse is when I write emails. I really used to enjoy writing emails, and I would write emails to people that I probably shouldn't be writing emails to, and being a little overly direct. And I really had to confront that and say, listen, I am my father's son. He was an engineer, very by the book, just says what it is, no time for fluff. And I thought that was a good quality. And I am learning, I am learning that I sometimes am off-putting with that and turn people off and can kind of come across as abrasive. And so that's something I'm working on. And I was quite honest with the panel and said, I'm not done. I'm not here to tell you I'm fully done and gee, everything I say is going to be great from here on out. It's really not. It's a learning process. I have a growth mindset. I'm trying to improve on those things, but I'm not here to snow you and give you a trite answer such as, what's my weakness? I just care too much. I guess I just care too much about this play. If you're following that, that's an old mindset. That was the way people were coached 20 years ago to answer that question about the weakness. Okay, that is come and gone. It's become very trite, very predictable, and the panel will see through that. So it's okay to let people know what your weakness is, because here's the secret. Oftentimes they already know, right? Oftentimes they already know. And when you become a sergeant or a lieutenant or what have you, it's okay to still have weaknesses and to be honest about them, because once again, your subordinates already know. They know if you fly off the handle. They know if you are a little too lax with things. They know about that. So it's okay to admit and be realistic when you answer that question. Jens, any thought about that? Or I'm going to go ahead and push forward into some interview questions.
Hey, Scott, can I just add one
Please.
little caveat on that too? Honestly, if you're asking, well, that's great. I know I have a weakness with oral interviewing, and that's really what's like, say that's your foot. Well, then, we've given you some advice how to fix that. Again, I just want to steer it back how we started this whole thing out. If you don't know, if you honestly are looking like, hey, I can think of some, but I'm not really sure how I'm viewed or whatever, go ask. Find that person in the department who will give you that honest feedback. All I can promise you is that it's not probably going to be comfortable. If they're really if they really care about you and want to see you change and achieve what you want, the feedback you may get may piss you off. It may hurt a little bit, but that's the start where a talent man, I've had it happen to myself. And when people told me some stuff, it was a hard pill to swallow, but I go, you know what? If that's the problem, then it's my responsibility to try to fix that and to fix myself to fix that problem. And so if you don't know that question, the true answer to that question, go seek somebody out that will tell you, and then figure out how you're going to start chipping away at that and changing it.
Yeah, elite performers are interested in feedback that tells them what they've done wrong, not what they've done right. Elite athletes, special forces folks, and elite police officers are interested in feedback about what can I do to improve. Don't pat me on the back and tell me all the things I'm doing great. Tell me how I can get better, because I'm only interested in getting better. So if you approach things with a growth mindset like that, you will go seek out constructive criticism. Is it going to hurt? Yes. Right after you get the criticism, you're going to want to choke the life out of the person that just told you that stuff, because it's going to hurt and burn. And that's okay. It's okay to be emotional about it. Let a day go by and then just sit and think about it. Is there any part of what they're saying that is true? Is there any part that might either be true or the perception's out there? So you're going to have to confront it. If there is a perception about being a certain way or being XYZ, you're going to have to do something about that, right? To just say, well, that's not true, and people should just know my heart and know how great I am. You may find yourself being passed over because you didn't go confront that thing. Lean into it. Go confront that thing. There's a question on here about, if a commander shoulder taps you to promote, should you take the test? Doesn't really feel right. And the person that asked it says, I'm not doing as much as others who really want to promote. I know I have my take on that, but what would you guys say? Somebody of rank comes and taps you on the shoulder and said, hey, you should really try to promote. And you're not really feeling it right now. Maybe you're not done being an officer and kind of running and gunning or doing whatever you want to do, or putting in for this task force for that. Should you promote because someone asks you to promote?
I'll give a crack at that one, Scott. I think right now a lot of agencies are very, very young. And perhaps that leader in your organization sees something in you that maybe possibly you don't see, and you probably should seriously consider taking the test. And as for not preparing, I think you're doing yourself a disservice, whether you're ready or not. Someone is probably trying to mentor you. I would take a look into that. That there's probably, there's definitely a reason why someone's shoulder tapping you, or more, I would like to say, probably encouraging you to promote. I know I've talked to some of my guys. We're always looking for new leaders. Good leaders are always looking to see who's going to replace them. So I think that's just what's going on with that. And I think you definitely, just you being here in this webinar, I think you definitely should prepare as much as you could. And whether if you're not ready, then you're not ready. But if you're considering it, just based on you being here in this webinar, then I think you probably should go get after it.
Yeah, I think Lloyd's right on. I'll tell you one thing. I don't blow sunshine when I tap people on the shoulder and say, you really should think about being promoted. I'm not doing it to make them feel good. I'm not doing it, because they just happen to be the first person I ran into that day. I'm doing it because that's what I think. And if I was in that position today, if I was, early in my career, which I'm not, but if I was, and someone did that, I think the right response would be, oh, thank you, sir or ma'am. I really appreciate you taking the time to let me know that. Why do you mind me asking, why do you say that? What do you see in me? And then hopefully they'll say something, and then maybe, push your luck a little bit and said, it would be great if we could have the opportunity to sit down and discuss this in a little bit more detail. Would you have 15 minutes that you could do that sometime? And, the odds are about 50% that person is going to say, yeah, how about right now? And they're just going to, sit down in your cubicle or wherever you happen to be and just engage in conversation. Or they say, yeah, how about, I have an opening at 1 o'clock this afternoon. Why don't you swing by my office and we can have a chat? And that's a gift. You can get some insight into what your leadership is expecting of you and take advantage of that. Now, on the other hand, it's a possibility they could say, no, just, keep doing what you're doing. That famous line, right? Keep doing what you're doing. But I hope to see you take the sergeant's test. So they're kind of brushing you off. Okay, but there's nothing ventured, nothing gained, right? So if they do take the time to do that, try to get a little bit of information out of them and hopefully open it up to a relationship, a mentoring opportunity that maybe wasn't there, in the 5 seconds before that encounter happened. Those types of things, especially depending on the size of your agency and who the personalities are involved, can be a real gift, a real once in a year, once in a decade opportunity. So you'd be well advised to take advantage of it.
Dan, thoughts on that?
Wow, that's all good advice, man. I wish I was still in the game. I'd do better next time. I think I'm going to go back to kind of the tactical world. Windows of opportunities open and close, and I do like Lloyd's advice as far as like, hey, you don't want to be testing when it's the time that you really, really, really want it, because that window of opportunity may open or it may close. The department changes can happen. You can think, oh, okay, well, when that person retires, I'm going to take their position. And then all of a sudden there's a whole shakeup that happens. New sheriff, new chief, and things go in a different direction. So you do have to think about that. Part of promoting is timing. It's not just the opportunity, but it's when it's set up. And if somebody's tapping you, again, heed the advice that's coming from here. Follow up on the conversation with it, and see if you can get why that person. If you're absolutely, on the flip side, I will answer, but what if you're absolutely not ready? Well, then think about, take a little bit to think about your response. And if you're not going to promote, at least have a reason. Don't just brush that person off. I would say if you've had, especially somebody of higher rank that comes and taps you on the shoulder and says, hey, I would really like to see you take this test. And you decide, because I'm thinking of an individual that I did that for years. Hey, man, this is, and it always come back and for reasons, like, you know what, it's not that I'm just having too much fun as a sergeant. It's like, you know what, I want to progress forward with the department, but there's these things, these opportunities I had, whether it was my kids or whatever, but there are also some of these like career opportunities that I really, I'm hoping that I can get accomplished, because I think it's going to make me better rounded for that position. And I appreciate that, but I need to stay in this role a little bit, and having, if they've already tapped you and they're willing to have an honest conversation of why they think you're good, then I would take the risk of having an honest conversation. If you decide like, hey, this time just isn't the right time for me, follow up and have that conversation. I just, as the rest of the panelists are saying, I would caution you that, again, that windows of opportunities and timing, every promotion, especially, I'm sure in San Diego where you're promoting a bunch of sergeants, but smaller agencies, medium-sized agencies, maybe we're promoting 1, 2, or 4. And there may be different reasons that we need to promote, what skill sets we need to fill that gap of that promotion process. And that opportunity may open up for you and you just decide not to take it, and then it closes because next time, they really needed this more community outreach person that's got that skill set, and your partner's got more of that background, so they get the promotion and you don't. That's just the reality of it.
Yeah, I guess, the only thing I could add is maybe I'll take a little bit of a contrarian view to the other panelists, but I would just, think about it when someone asks you to put in for an assignment or a promotion, that's great, right? And that's a compliment, that feels good. And I would agree, get all the information you can from them as far as, learning about things. But at the end of the day, don't put yourself in a position where you are doing someone else's bidding. Just because someone tells you you're going to be great for something, if your heart's not in it, and you're going to kind of wind up miserable or in a position you didn't necessarily want, it's okay to say no, respectfully. And you would follow up with an email and gosh, it really means a lot to me that you thought this highly of me. At this time, it's not a great fit for me and the family, but it's something I'm definitely going to keep exploring. It's okay to say no. I find myself in that position at the department I'm at now. I'm really kind of in the twilight of my law enforcement career, getting ready to retire in a few years, and then get asked, would you consider putting in for this or that? And it's a great compliment, feels great, but I also have to be true to myself. And that I kind of already have done all those things, and that's not a good fit for me right now. So just make sure you're never in a position where you're going to kind of be unsuccessful because your heart wasn't in it, where you didn't really study for the test, you didn't try that hard, and then you kind of got last on the list and everyone's like, oh man, you got last on the list. Well, that's not going to feel very good. And you're trying to tell, well, they wanted me, but I didn't want it. And it's like, well, then just don't put in and wait till a later time to approach that. So someone said, you've been at your department for 20 years plus. What if they ask you why now? Ooh, that's a great question. So you've been not promoting for 20 years, and now suddenly you're on the promotion list, and everyone's kind of looking at you. Hey, is this guy doing it because he wants his last highest year, to be at this other salary? How would you? Maybe how does that look to you guys as administrators when you see that name come up and you're like, this guy, I thought he was a a career officer, a career deputy?
You know, the answer may seem obvious, but I think the best answer to a question like that is, you know, I think because of my experience and what I've done, I think I have a lot to give back to the organization. And that's really what a leader is doing, is giving to others, giving to the organization. So if you frame it that way, yeah, you certainly don't want to say, well, I'm looking for a nice retirement gift. I mean, that's the wrong, but the good answer is, you know, I really gave everything into my career. I've done everything, and maybe I should have promoted earlier. Maybe I should have considered it, but regardless, you know, I can't change the past, but I really think I have a lot to give back. And I have, you know, at 20 years, you still have time to give back. I'll be honest, sometimes when that question comes out of the 35-year employee, you do have to wonder a little bit, maybe dive a little deeper into that. But I think at 20 years, it's pretty easily dealt with just by that. It's time to give back a little.
Yeah, you're not ready to be put out to pasture with 20 years on. You still have a lot to contribute, and yeah, maybe lean into that question. And you know, one thing I would think of as well, you know, I've spent the last 20 years in doing a variety of things, or raising young kids, or I've been involved in a variety of assignments, and I was always careful not to promote when it was still about me and my career, you know, and as you know, I've worked these assignments and I've kind of gotten a lot of great experience, but now I'm really at a place where I'm not that interested in just how can I serve my resume and my career. Now it's all about other people. You know, it's all about serving others and helping folks achieve kind of the career path that I had, which was great, you know, and oftentimes I think we eat our own as law enforcement industry. And if somebody has spent, you know, just a long time pushing a patrol car around, that is looked at negatively. But if I'm an administrator, if I'm a decision maker, I would actually think about, you have so much to offer as a expert in patrol, because everything we see on CNN and all the things that go wrong with cops and the lawsuits and whatnot, 90% of those start in patrol, right? It's a patrol call for service, a car stop, or something like that. I want people in positions of influence who are experts in patrol, in decision making, who have done it right, assuming you've done it kind of right, who understand how to make those types of quick decisions with limited resources, or what have you. You can really lean into something like that and explain how you understand risk management. Is the juice worth the squeeze? Understanding when to walk away from something. Talk to the panel about that. You know, highlight your strengths, as opposed to just, well, I know I've only been in patrol, but you know, I think I'm pretty good at it. No, come on, be your own champion there. Okay. All right, let's get into a little bit about oral interview dynamics, a little bit about kind of what some thoughts, ways to dominate the oral interview, if that's possible. I know that gets people a little bit nervous, because they're worrying about kind of how they're going to come across. But I think it's good to talk about a few ways, a few kind of tactical tips to take away, both in the oral interview and in the tactical scenario. So certainly for sergeant, probably for other positions as well, you're going to be facing some kind of tactical scenario. In other words, someone's going to say, okay, you went on a call and this happened and then that happened. And usually it's this crazy, you know, over the top kind of incident. And I just want to see how you put your thoughts together. So just thinking, just in oral interview dynamics, maybe we can do that one first. What are some of the kind of high level key takeaways that candidates can do to be successful in the oral interview?
One of them that came up recently was the good old fashioned timer. It's coming up more and more. I know I've been a victim of it and been almost defeated by it. And I think it's something that anybody could work through, especially, you know, me coming from the experience of having it. It's like they got an egg timer, they're sitting there, you're nervous already, you're not expecting it, and they're like, okay, you got 20 minutes. And then you go from being collective and ready to have a conversation with your panelists to almost being on a game show and trying to knock out these questions and worried about, you know, am I going to be able to get to the closing? Because it seems like a lot of people I've talked to and that have been a victim to the timer where they're just trying to get through it really quick. But even if they tell you have 20 minutes, 30 minutes, it's plenty of time. And it's kind of a mental thing where you really have to get it out of your head and go on about your business, where you're having a conversation with these folks on the panel. The timer has been showing up a little bit more where I work, and some of my last coaching sessions I've had, it's been timed also, and it's difficult. It's definitely difficult to get through, but it's something it's a mind game. You're going to have plenty of time to get through the oral board.
Right, and so it wouldn't be a bad idea, even if you have heard that, gee, there's not a timer and there is no time limit on this panel, on the interview you're going to take. It wouldn't be a bad idea to rehearse with a timer. That way you get used to what 3 minutes is, right? Get very familiar with 3 minutes. That's kind of a great thing to aim for. No more than that. Even if there's not a timer, going on for over 3 minutes when you're answering a question, naturally you're going to start to lose some of the audience member there, the interviewer. And a takeaway for performing oral interviews is this: clarity wins over quantity. Clarity is always going to win over quantity. And if you think about it, that's not true just in the oral interview. That is true in advertising, right? That is true in political campaigns. Clarity over quantity. You may think, I'm going to go into a oral interview and I'm going to list 25 different things that makes me a great candidate. And here's the 17 different awards I won and the 14 different assignments I worked. Remember, the interviewer has to write this thing down. So give us the best parts, the most distilled answer you can. That clarity wins. Clarity wins. Think about that for a second. When you think of Nike's slogan, what is it, right? Just do it. When you think of political campaigns, remember when Trump was putting in against Hillary Clinton? If you go back and do a little bit of research, when Trump was trying to competing against Hillary Clinton had something like 150 or so different points, her platforms on defense spending, on a number of things, 150 different points on our website that largely a lot of people didn't read. By all analysis, she was the more qualified from a political standpoint than Donald Trump was. But what was Donald Trump's campaign? What did he run on? What was his platform? Make America Great Again, right? You remember that one. Do you remember what Hillary's were? Whether they were better or not, we can have a debate about. But clarity is always going to win over quantity. So when you're answering questions like, what are your strengths? What makes you the best candidate? Just think, okay, how can I be most clear versus how can I answer with so many different things, right? What other tips do you guys think about in oral interviews?
Just to touch on that very briefly, a good tip or a practical sense, you said they're writing notes of everything you say. Well, when the panel sets their pen down and puts the paper off to the side a little bit and folds their hands and rests them on the table, that's a very nice way of saying, please shut up now. We have another question to ask you. So, read the body language of the people in the room. And if they're not writing it down, then either you're telling a really good joke, which you should probably avoid in these type of interviews, or a compelling story, or more than likely you've just worn them out and they're ready to move on, and you should be too.
Yeah, I would definitely echo that, man. As soon as your panel puts the pen down or they just stop writing and are just looking at you like this, then again, move on, because you just lost them. What's worked for me and what's worked for people that I've coached throughout my career and then through the coaching program is again, we talked about, you're trying to sell this is your time to shine on the qualities and the characteristics you have. So I would, again, do your homework, and I would get like 3 to 5. Like, these are solid qualities about me or skill sets that I have that are unique, that translate into the position I'm applying for. And then when you identify, like say, hey, I'm a good collaborator as far as I can create a team very easily. Say that's one thing that you think you're good at. Think of some real world examples, real life examples that you can say, because it's one thing to say, hey, I'm a good collaborator. It's another thing to be able to kind of prove through very humble but real stories, as far as like, hey, let me just give you an example of that because I had this situation. This is how I handled it. So it's going to translate into, this supervisory role or lieutenant or whatever it is. There was a question that came up. So that's one thing. Write down your characteristics and then have some real life experience that you can kind of interject with into your panel, and say that question never comes up. One thing that can do is, if you clearly have the message that you want to, like, these are the 5 points I want the panel to know about me, these are the 5 things, then that kind of helps you with the questions that get asked. Because as a question gets asked, you can really think to yourself and go, hey, you know what, that question, the base of it has to do with this strength that I have. And so I'm going to answer the question. I'm going to answer the question and not just go into my strength, but answer the question and then weave that characteristic that you have, or that skill set, that experience, into your answer. And that's going to come across as a much more like, all right, it's not that they know the buzzwords, but they actually have the examples and can kind of convince through the story. A question came up earlier about humor. If humor is who you are, then again, be true. But this isn't a stand-up comedian show. This isn't about like opening with a good one-liner or something like this. This is like, so if by nature you're kind of outgoing and then that's going to come across a little bit, if you're more humorous or something, but that shouldn't be the focus. And especially if it seems that the panel is completely serious because the question came up, I tried this joke and it was ill received, then move on from it. And now, like, hey man, I'm sticking to like just the facts. I'm going to be concise on my answers and I'm going to get through this. If I can add one other thing,
please.
Or you want to call it?
No, please.
One other thing. We talked about like looking at a lot of people, you get the job announcement and then there's those typical duties and assignments. And most of it, like if you're going to interview for sergeant, you're like, yeah, I've been on the job for 15, whatever it is, how many years, and I know what a sergeant does. I would encourage you, take some time, do your homework, actually look at the typical duties and other stuff that's all on that HR printout. Because what that may help you do is, this is how I've helped myself or helped others with it, is I look at those duties and I go, you know what, as a lieutenant, I didn't realize that there was this data management component. I've never really managed data, but so if I'm going to be interviewing for this, that question may come up. So how would I respond to, say, that example of what they're saying, or some budgetary item, whatever those typical duties are, or some unique things that will be aside. I know what your lieutenants do. I know what your sergeants do. But you may be surprised that there may be something on that job kind of description that you hadn't thought about. And you can do your homework by kind of preparing an answer, how you would respond if a question came up to that. And that's just going to help you have more confidence in kind of messaging yourself.
Yeah, just to touch on that, the job descriptor. Remember we talked about the panelists are sitting there and saying they're in a large agency and you're number, 15 of 30 that day. And they're scratching it out all day long. But, if they ask say a really vanilla question, what are some of the duties or that come with this assignment? What are some of the sergeant things that they do? And it's all right there on the job descriptor. And on the panelists, they have like little cheat sheet of bullet points that each oral board has to hit. And you ramble them off, and you're knocking them right off the list, and they're checking every box. So when they go back to grade your oral, and they're like, okay, Lloyd McKinnon, he hit all 9 of those. I got every check. So it's something that you probably might not think of, but people don't do it. They look at the job descriptor for 2 seconds, and all the answers are right there. So learn it and definitely know it. Depending on your agency, they might use exactly verbatim what those bullet points are in the question. The panelists will have it, and you'll knock it out of the park.
Yeah, some other takeaways. I think we talked about, putting yourself in the position of the interviewer, just like Lloyd's talking about. One kind of real tangible thing that I always suggest for people is to talk in bullet points. And I think, Lloyd, you might have alluded to that before, but it really, when we say talking in bullet points, it sounds something like this. Scott, why are you the best person for this job? Well, let me tell you that I'm the best person for this job because of my education, my training, and my leadership abilities. Now, let me tell you about each one of those. My education. I went and got this degree, and then I talk about that. My training, and then I talk about that. Leadership abilities, then I talk about that. By saying, here's the three things that make me, a good candidate for this position. Now let me go fill those in. What does that do to the interviewer? The interviewer is sitting there, and here's three things: easily written down bullet points, short and concise. Now I go back and fill them in, right? So if I run out of time, if I get nervous and forget to answer something, if I get stuck on a long story and I forget where I was, at least I got out those bullet points, right? It's a little hack. It's a little bit of a hack. If I say the bullet points, it's boop, boop, boop. Now let me go fill in the details for you. That interviewers wrote it down, and now they're ready to accept what I'm going to tell them. And they're going to make notes next to each one of those bullet points, right? So I'm going to keep talking in concise, manageable chunks, but I've told you my high level ideas, and now I'm filling it in. It's almost like I'm giving them an outline. That's going to prevent you from, oh my God, I can't believe I didn't tell them about, my time on the SWAT team, or I can't believe I didn't tell them about my education. How did I not tell them that? Candidates always walk out of these things going, how did I forget to say the best part? It's because you didn't have a plan going in to how you're going to answer the question. That's one little takeaway. Another one I would suggest is stay on message. Stay on message, meaning when they ask you off the wall questions about stuff, is there a way that you can circle back and be a little bit, not a lot, a little bit repetitive, right? Because this interview is almost like an exercise in memorization for them. You want that panel to be able to memorize a few little key things about you that separates you from other people and makes you who you are. It's the same thing we do when we're teaching our law enforcement training courses. This is an exercise in memorization. We are focusing on clarity, not quantity. We're trying to get you to remember certain things. We want to embed something in long-term memory. One of the ways we do that is repetition, right? So I'm going to hit things a few times, because if I want everyone to know that I was an FTO, I was on SWAT, and I worked the gang task force, and I want everyone to know that, I might have to say it more than once, because as I was saying it the first time, that interviewer was scratching his nose. And as I was saying it the first time, that interviewer was still on the last question, right? So it's okay to stay on message and kind of keep hammering it home, just like in advertising. How many times do they tell you the same thing over and over again? It says it takes 7 times before you'll remember something. So take some of this information and exploit it. Use it in your interview. You guys had mentioned the +1 concept. I think Dan and Mike, you mentioned this +1 concept. Can you talk a little bit about that?
Sure. What makes you who you are? What makes you want to do the job? So I remember when I was young, when I was in high school, I was lucky enough to get a job as a lab tech in a private criminalistics laboratory. So just, that was back when we did things like develop film and, simple experiments, setting things up, making sure that the beakers in the chemistry lab were all clean, just, grunt work. But one thing I learned in that was that high quality police work, high quality investigations leads to successful prosecutions, which leads to bad guys going to prison. And the kind of work that they did in that lab was mostly murder cases, sexual assault cases, and quite a few capital cases. And I would go home and I would talk about with my family, say, hey, they have this case they're working on, without, breaking any confidentiality rules. And boy, it seems like the cops really screwed up the crime scene on that, and now they're having to deal with all these issues. So I would take that and say, and that's how I learned that it's really important to do high quality police work, and that's what really drove me to want to become a police officer. Well, it got me hired, and then when I was going for detective and sergeant, I would tap into that a little bit and go back to that poignant story and say, this is what drives me, because I know that if good work isn't done, there's consequences down the road. Killers go free, rapists go free, victims don't get justice, that type of thing. Another real quick one is I was interviewing somebody for a position, and she had a poignant story. A close personal friend of hers when she was going to college, and she was studying something besides, she didn't have a career in law enforcement in mind at the time, like say it was accounting or something she was studying. Well, that close personal friend was tragically murdered. And she talked about, her interactions with the law enforcement officers and the investigators and how justice was brought about. And that changed her, it opened her eyes to the possibilities of what good public safety can be and what it can mean to a community. And it totally changed her path. And she's had a very successful career in law enforcement ever since then. And telling that story made her more than just a candidate to me, it made her a human being. So I understood kind of what was driving her. And that's a key part of the promotional process. You don't spend 20 minutes on a story, make it short and to the point, but what is it that drives you? What motivates you and what's going to make you different than your competition? Not degrading your competition, but just saying, this is what I think is important and this is why. And the panel will see that and it will be a plus for you.
Yeah, if you're going to tell a story, if you're going to use humor or a poignant story, that's great. And that can be a personal example of what you want to talk about, kind of personalize things. Make sure you're good at telling stories, right? Make sure you're great at telling stories. Get rid of all of the details we don't need to know, right? And just give us the salient points. And when you're writing out your story, which I encourage you to do to practice telling the story, take out anything that doesn't 100% matter, right? Take out anything that's not helping to tell that story. We don't need to know every little detail. What we do need to know is what's the point, right? In music, if you're a musician, the chorus of the song, there's the verses, and then there's the chorus, the thing that everybody sings along to that happens a couple of times. There's a great quote in songwriting. It says, "Don't bore us, get to the chorus." That's the part that everybody wants to hear, right? So you can set it up a little bit. There I was driving one day and then this, get to the point quickly, be concise and use that to color the story. Just don't go on this like long roundabout thing where nobody can follow it. And, that practicing writing it out brings me to another point, which is practice. Deliberate, purposeful practice. Repetition is not necessarily practice, okay? If you're just going to practice interviewing by just repeating the same thing over and over again to try to memorize something, that may help you memorize or repeat it, but that's not necessarily deliberate practice. What you want to do is get in front of people that can give you proper feedback, right? That's going to double check everything you think is awesome. I've watched candidates come in and interview for stuff and you're like, I can't believe they're doing this right now. They're blowing it. Did no one tell them that? Did no one tell them that this is not the thing to do? And the answer is probably no. Double, triple check what you think is awesome. And that story that you think is great is in fact awesome and great, right? You can use our coaching program or we'll run you through mock oral interviews or whatever you use. You can probably do part of it yourself, right? Could you not pull out your phone and videotape yourself, giving an oral interview? Have someone else maybe videotape it? I promise you, when you watch it back, you will sound different than you think you sound. I can't stand my voice when it's recorded. Oh, I was like, is this what I sound like? The answer is yes. This is how the world hears you. Get rid of the ums, get rid of this and that, pare everything down and distill your answers. Less than 3 minutes, talk in bullet points. Don't bore us, get to the chorus. Gents, anything about that?
I was thinking the same thing, Scott. I was going to say that, like you now with your phone, you can video yourself. And it's not only good to video, or talk in front of the mirror, but then, sleep on it and then go back. So, because you're not trying to practice this polished speech. It's really about, can you genuinely cover points that you're trying to get clearly, concisely? And I think, you watch it and then you sleep on it, or you have somebody look at it, you're gonna kind of recognize where you've rambled or where you've gotten off mark, and how do I bring that back to a really clear and concise answer. Michael, you asked, about talking about your opposition. I think it does come into some of this in preparing. the reality, we said every candidate that usually tests for sergeant has a pretty detailed background. Just recognize that and say, yeah, there are some strong candidates. But here's how I would approach too, thinking about every rank or leadership position, you are ultimately responsible for 3 different groups. If I'm a supervisor, I'm responsible for the people that are below me, my subordinates. I'm responsible for my peers, my fellow sergeants, and I'm responsible for the leaders and the people above me, and working within each one of those. And so if you're talking about like, hey, who am I competing with or whatever, yeah, you can recognize they have some skill sets, and then, hammer yours home, but recognize that, ultimately this person may be my peer and I have to have this good working relationship, or I may be their subordinate. And part of me being a good leader is recognizing then how do I make my leaders that much better. And I think that can kind of help. And so just practice it. Make sure you have a sounding board that when you are talking to people, you can kind of hit that those points that you want clearly and concisely.
Hey, we've got about 20 minutes left. Why don't we dive into some more questions? If you've got a question, throw it into the Q&A. I want to just kind of end talking a little bit about the tactical scenario and things you can do to pass that. And by tactical scenario, I mean, you're in the interview and they say, okay, you're the watch commander. You've got this many cops on duty. It's this time of night. And then a pursuit kicks off, and the pursuit crashes into a building, and now that building's on fire, and you got 3 people running from the pursuit. And oh, by the way, a plane crashed into the school bus of pediatric hemophiliacs, and it's just going, and you're sitting there going, what in the world is happening? And oftentimes, here's a trick. Those scenarios are purposely designed to overwhelm you, right? They don't want to throw you a softball. They want to overwhelm you, because you will feel that as a supervisor. I want to hear just maybe from the panel, how would you approach that? My 2 cents on approaching that is tangible takeaway is 1, exercise control over that. If you are a watch commander or whatever position they put you in, your job is not to do a lot of things. Your job is to get a lot of things done. 2, prioritize it by asking what's important now, what's important next, right? Life safety over evidence preservation. Stabilizing, can we stabilize the dynamic portion before we deal with the static portion? If they say the guy barricades, but you still got a pursuit kicking off over here, the pursuit may be the one we need to try to put a cork on. Delegate responsibilities. Who can I deputize? Who's my senior people that I can call upon to run a particular scene? And then I always like to end with something like, I control the scenario. So I say, well, I've provided training to my staff in managing critical incidents before this scene. So I know that I can tap out Joe and Sally because I've trained them both on incident command, and I can start delegating responsibilities to them. See how you're controlling it. You're controlling the answer, even though they're not going to hop in and say, no, you didn't do that. But what is your guys' thoughts on how to deal with a tactical scenario?
Well, we're overwhelmed by silence there.
Not all at once. Not all at once.
Yeah, I think you're right on, and it's always about the bigger the situation gets that they're throwing at you, kind of the higher altitude you have to take in your UAV or your helicopter or whatever you want to call it. I would look for people who could say, I'm going to see what surrounding stations and cities can send me to help, and I'm going to organize those into teams and give those teams specific responsibilities to take care of. If it becomes a long, drawn-out process, we're really big on using the incident command system, and I would make sure that if I was a promotional candidate, I would throw out there, I would start setting up an incident command. I would designate this person as my operations chief. That's the first person you usually have to designate, and then give them responsibility to do this. And I know that's, like you said, I'm going to choose the right person to do that, because whether it's from your agency or another agency, they have to be thinking broad. If all they can do is say, well, I'd ask for air support and I'd ask for a canine unit. Well, that's just not going to cut it for a big situation like that. You're going to have to really elevate the thinking and go, it's 3 o'clock in the morning, the chief's asleep, your captains are asleep. You're going to have to do this yourself. You're not going to be able to wait for a team meeting in the morning. So, what can you get into the theater of operations as quickly as possible to contain it, control it, and to communicate what you need to communicate out.
Great. Lloyd or Dan, any thoughts on tactical scenario?
Yeah, I think you covered a lot of the points. I mean, one, ultimately somebody needs to be in charge, and that's going to be you. And so you can go down the route of, well, I'm going to contain and set a perimeter and really get into the finite, but really it comes down to prioritizing what needs to happen, and what Scott said, what's important now, identifying those priorities, delegating, not you physically doing everything. I would even say if they throw the scenario that Scott just threw at us, one of the things I would, whether I was a supervisor candidate or not, I would say, like, one of the other things I'm going to do is I'm going to get help at the command post. I'm still responsible for that, but radios are going to be going, and I'm going to need to delegate even some responsibility as far as, and that kind of senses that you have a kind of a grasp of the decision making and kind of that level of control that needs to be put on one of these events, and then choosing what your priorities are, and then clearly communicating those out. And the other advice I would give you is, most departments, if it's a barricade or a hostage or something like that, they have a policy. I would read the policy, because there may be things specific for your department. Even if it's an outside panel, you may say, oh, and by the way, if I'm going to roll my armored rescue vehicle out there, I know that I have to get the commander's approval. So I'm going to have to get that going on, but I might delegate that to that. It's just so you kind of have a full grasp, and you're not just, you get to control the response to your scenario, but realistically what we're looking at is, are you going to take a lead example, and are you going to be able to make decisions and prioritize, and then delegate the responsibility to get those done?
Yeah, both what Mike and Dan said. But the ICS part definitely resonated with me, because again, I don't want to beat it up too much, but we're looking at panelists that have been sitting there all day, and how are we going to get those bullet points checked? So, stating stuff that you're already thinking about, this is going to be a long-term mission, the next operational plan, having your ICS in order, stuff like that. I mean, even, if it was going into a sergeant, where's the CP going to be? Where are we going to stage media? Stuff like that, to really show that the ICS system, and knocking that out on, again, on their list that they're trying to establish, and give you that +1 to beat the other folks that you're testing against. I think it's huge. And again, definitely start talking about the big picture, the 1,000 or the 10,000 foot view, and you're going to always want to think of on the future. We have these huge protests that are going on. If you're just going to say, yeah, we're getting mobile field force for today, and we're making sure we have 10 cases of water, well, that's great. That's a little tiny answer. But to show that you really know what you're doing, and you start talking about next operational period, how are we going to get patrol coverage, really drilling down into it, is going to definitely put you above and beyond that leadership role.
Yeah, and if you're handed a kind of a soup sandwich of a scenario, there's a few just kind of key takeaways that you can start thinking about, like the panel has mentioned, right? First thing I'm going to do is establish incident command. What does that mean? One might just gloss over that and think, well, I got to put on that little vest that says incident commander. Maybe there's a little hat I get. That doesn't mean anything. What does it mean? I'm going to establish incident command. It means I'm going to get on radio. I'm going to announce the fact that I am the incident commander. Everything's going to come through me. I'm going to establish a command post. What does that mean? Well, I'm going to pull my truck over at a given location, and I'm going to say, this is the command post. And then I'm going to start setting priorities, right? This is what we want to do first, second, third, fourth, fifth. And it's okay to have imperfect answers, because this is an imperfect scenario, much like the real world. You have imperfect information coming in. What are my priorities? I want to try to seek stabilization. I'm trying to seek stabilization. There's a lot of resources we can bring to bear on anything in law enforcement. Is there something we can do that stabilizes? It may not fix, may not be the solution, but is there something I can do that puts a pause on this? That it's like whatever's happening in this cork and this wine bottle is going crazy. Is there a cork I can put in it just for a second, just to give us a tactical pause, to allow us to use things like additional resources, time and distance, and all the wonderful things that we can do? So If there's a dynamic component of a particular thing, is there some way to put a pause on that? There may be something in there where they're trying to get you confused on kind of the shiny object, right? Be asking yourself, is there a crime here? What's the want? Is the juice worth the squeeze? Is there some other way we can deal with this other than whatever path they're trying to take me down, right? We've got some great training about responding to critical incidents that I would recommend. Response Tactics for Critical Incidents and In-Progress Crimes is a great course. We've got in-person training courses, we've got online training courses, and I think that's a good kind of primer to get you thinking about what the panel just mentioned: incident command, 10,000 foot view, seeking stabilization, all those types of stuff. But be prepared for a just curveball scenario that they want to see if they can get you sucked in. Don't let them win. Don't let the panel win, right? Take that 10,000 foot view. Don't get sucked into you doing something. Talk about how you're going to get that work done through others. And as you rise up in rank, your purview should be getting larger and larger and larger. And delegate to the lowest common or lowest person you can. If it's appropriate to delegate to a sergeant below you or an officer below you, do that. Show how you can give away tasks appropriately while still maintaining command, control, responsibility for what's happening. And you understand how to kind of give away things, giving away tasks to where now I'm just back at the command post thinking, right? As a sergeant or a lieutenant, or you're back at the command post using this thing up here versus doing a lot of stuff with your hands. And that kind of just will communicate a pretty big purview there. Any other thoughts about winning the tactical scenario, or I can jump into some of these questions here.
One quick little bullet point is just recognize that they're going to try to throw curveballs sometimes. I've seen all kinds where they almost do try to sometimes make it unwinnable, or you'll say, hey, this is the course action I'm going to take, and then they'll kind of attack that, or there'll be a follow-up. Well, what about this? Just recognize, go with confidence that every chaotic scene has uncertainty, and you can talk about that. You know what I know is that if I'm in charge of this and I'm running it, I'm going to have to make decisions without all the intelligence and the information. I'm going to try to constantly seek that. But so, yeah, sitting in, what you presented with me now, this is the decision I'm making based upon the information, and kind of stick to your guns on that, and don't start wavering and second guessing yourself, because that's sometimes what they're intentionally trying to do, to try to get you to change your response, because you may be spot on. They're just trying to see if you're going to kind of stick to your guns, which in a tactical situation, some of those decisions you have to make, you're making with not all the information. Based upon the intelligence information you have, you make that decision and you move forward. And that's kind of what you have to do in those oral interviews as well.
Great. So what I want to do is we'll get some questions answered, and I would encourage you, if you're listening to this live, to go ahead and hit us up with your questions, and we'll try to answer everyone that we can. But I know we're coming close to the end of our stated time, so I just want to say to Mike, in case you need to leave right at noon, what a pleasure it's been having you as a guest, and thank you for taking 3 hours out of your day to kind of help folks from all over. There are people from all across the United States that are, on this call right now. And I just want to really thank you for taking the time to do that. And do you have any maybe parting wisdom for candidates that you can share?
It's been my pleasure to be part of this panel. Some great insights with Lloyd, Dan, and yourself. I can't think of a better way to spend my time than to help people that are at the beginning stages of their career be successful, so that our profession can be successful. These are unprecedented challenges we're facing right now, but resolving these challenges doesn't mean there's not going to be more challenges down the road. So thank you for the opportunity, Scott, and I look forward to seeing, I may not know personally anybody on this call, or I might. I haven't seen the list of attendees, but I wish you all the best and success, and I know that this seminar will be a positive in your career, and I encourage you to take other opportunities to do this, such as the coaching mentoring program that has been mentioned. Thank you very much. I'm going to be on for another 5 minutes, and then I do have to run. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. Okay, looking through some of these questions here. First one is, what if you're a lateral officer from out of state and you've only been with your current agency for a couple of years? How can you sell your total experiences to your admin and a promotional board who may only look at your experience at this agency? I feel for this person. I left my agency after 18 years. I was a sergeant and I started over at a new agency at the bottom of the rung, right? As an officer, pushing a patrol car around and gosh, does everyone realize how great I am and all these wonderful things I did? Maybe, maybe not. And if I was going to try to get promoted again, gosh, how do you approach that? How do you approach that with the panel? Let them know how awesome you are.
Well, you are going to have to bring up that experience. You're just going to have to address it head on and say what you did and what exactly the responsibilities for. Don't assume that they're going to know about it or even care about it until you bring it up and address it head on. Those experiences are real. They're valuable. They may not have witnessed them like they would if it was within the same agency, but don't ever discount them and don't hesitate to bring them up. It's you would really be selling yourself short if you did.
That's really true. Lloyd, what's your thoughts on that?
Well, I have a little bit of experience with this. I think, coming from Connecticut over to California, I mean, you might as well have been thrown in a scenario to speak a different language entire. I didn't go to the academy here. I had to do some other stuff like challenge post. So I faced that, and I remember being in my oral board, and I had a few at a variety of different agencies in California. So I got some that I didn't get, obviously, but I got some practice. And I kind of, what we talked about, I addressed it head on. Like, am I going to have problems learning the penal code here in California, where 900 new laws come every year? And how did it translate from my time in Connecticut? And I brought all the positives with me. I said, I have the tenacity to learn. I'm going to learn. I've already been studying. I've reached out to area academies and got back when they gave you the paper LDs, and I started to learn. So I think that's, you bring that as a positive. Yeah, you're coming from a different state, you're coming to California or wherever the agency may be, but bring that experience that you're committed to lifelong learning, and this is just an example of it. And the stuff that you maybe thought that wasn't good at your old agency, we'll leave that there. But any positives that you can bring and to the new department, that's what you want to talk about.
Very true. You got to talk about it. Can't assume anything. And remember, no one owes you anything, right? No one owes you a thing. They don't owe you to be like, well, you must be a great guy because you have a bunch of years on it we've never saw at a previous agency. You're going to have to tell them and show them what makes you so awesome. Dan, any thoughts on that?
I would just expand it a little bit to say any experience that you've had, even pre-law enforcement, say that correlates to the job that but if you, I remember one interview, this candidate came in talking about how they were a bank manager. And at first you're like, oh, but how they correlated it to the job that they were testing for and the skill sets that it created in that experience, man, it really resonated. I remember all of us were like, man, wow, that was a good answer. So any experience, just think about it, but it has to correlate. You can't just say, well, I was the coach of I was the captain of my football team. Well, great. Did it do anything, or just everybody liked you? You know what I'm saying? So really, if there's some skill that you're trying to sell to this panel, remember, we're selling ourselves in a way, but I'm trying to let them know, and you've got past life experience, whether it's from another agency or a completely different job that has hammered that skill into you, then man, bring it forward to the panel and let them know.
Yeah, it's really smart. I think it's just about telling your story in a humble way that is respectful to the fact that there are folks at the agency you're working at now who have been there a lot longer than you have, and that you're coming in as a guest and you're bringing your experiences, but again, in a humble way. Next question says, this is a good question. I have taken the test twice in 3 years and I passed it both times. I'm not the best test taker and I sweat like a hog. The one thing that they have said on both times were that my answers were roundabout and that I would start answering them, but then go on and then circle back. The feedback was to be more direct, but I don't feel like I can get my point across as detailed that way, Okay, you are the person we want to coach. You have a tangible problem that I think we have a solution for. So I'm hoping you, whoever asked that question was anonymous, takes advantage of the coaching program. But here's the thing. You want to tell more, and we're suggesting you tell it more clear, right? You want to give more quantity, and we're suggesting you focus instead on clarity. Okay. Think about a soup that has been, or a sauce that's been cooking for a day on the stove. As that tomato sauce gets cooked longer and longer and longer, the material goes away. Water evaporates from the tomatoes, but what you're left with is a very concentrated, smaller amount that tastes better, right? And that's the same thing you do with clarity over quantity. Is we're going to distill down the essence of what you're trying to say into short, manageable chunks that tell your story, gets the point across in a concise, quick way, and gives the interviewers the ability to make notes and understand what you're saying. Long, roundabout stories with superfluous details that aren't the essence of what you're trying to get across are okay when you have unlimited time. But this is not a conversation. You're not talking to a friend, a family member at the bar. You're not doing any of that stuff. You're having to answer in an awkward way. And so we need to help you form the answers that's going to fit into that, if that makes sense. Am I right on the money there with trying to be concise? He's telling roundabout stories.
Yeah, for sure. I think we brought it up a little bit with the bullet points, and it's good to tell the story, but to have the answer also, not this long drawn out thing. And it shows that you're here on the webinar, and that you went back to the panelists and got good feedback. Go ahead, Dan. I'm sorry.
No, sorry. This anonymous. I would look at too that whole, whether you're talking in the mirror. Man, for you, I would use technology, have somebody ask you the question, record your response, sit on it, and go back and review it. And you're going to see, I think, if you're going around and round, like, man, just say it. And I know for me, great. I would bump questions off my wife prior to every promotional thing. And I'd sit down and say, hey, ask me this question. And I'd answer it. And she would give me honest feedback, but also I would have to look back. Yeah, I kind of rambled on that one point. So how do I just get it to be concise? And then the only other thing is, when you're in that interview, then you have to let it go. I mean, you have to have the confidence that, okay, I've said that, I could say more, but in this situation, I'm going to give that. And I'm going to kind of just let those short words be enough. And believe it or not, those usually come across as better interviews.
Right. And if you find yourself like this person that asked says, listen, I'm sweating like a hog as I'm giving my interview, that's nerves, right? That's a nervousness sign. And how do you deal with nerves? Well, your body thinks it's in danger. Your body is having a sympathetic nervous discharge, fight or flight or freeze, right? That's what's happening to you. And that's natural, because public speaking is definitely a fear-producing thing for folks. So how do you address that? Well, it's two things. You practice, you get more used to it, because as a police officer, you deal with scary stuff all the time, and you're not sweating, like a storm when you're facing down some parolee or something like that, right? You're used to dealing with high stress situations. So it's practice. And the second thing is a little bit of a mindset change. I'm not trying to get saying we're going to do, deep breathing and yoga and burn incense, but there is definitely some mindset work that needs to happen there, where we're actually just going to reframe it. Because remember, your body is reacting to a feeling you have. And that feeling came after you had a thought. You walked into the interview, you thought, oh my God, I'm going to screw this up. This is scary. You felt fear, panic, anxiety, and your body is reacting to that. All we need to do is work on changing your mindset, how you feel about that thought. When I first started out being an instructor, I was a little bit intimidated by public speaking. And someone told me a long time ago, just fake it until you make it. Pretend that you're not nervous, and then people will start to believe you're confident, and they'll give you, they'll look at you reassuringly because they're like, this guy's really confident, and then you'll start to feed off of that and start to believe it, and then before you know it, you've done it so many times, you actually are confident now. And now when I do public speaking and teach classes, I don't even think about it. I'm not even the remote bit nervous. So for you, you can work on that through practice, rehearsal, deliberate practice, and changing your mindset. Someone said, hey, how do you feel about candidates bringing a folder in with bullet points on them? How do you feel about candidates bringing they've got a folder, they've got some paperwork, and they're going to walk in with their bullet points on there? I'm okay with that. And I think it's a great thing to do if it's allowed. I guess that would be my question. Don't get stuck on that. What do you guys think about that?
Yeah, I think if it's allowed, for sure, but you don't want to get caught up where the whole time you're talking to me like this and, reading your bullet points out. If you have just some bullet points on a piece of paper in front of you and you get off track a little bit and you look down for a split second and it gets you back on message, then I'm okay with it. It's actually pretty smart.
I'd agree. Don't use it as a crutch. So you have your bullet points, just like Lloyd said, a quick flash down, like, oh man, maybe you saw one bullet point you missed, and then maybe you interweave that into the next question or whatever, or when you're collecting your thoughts for your question, just a quick glance. But if you're really relying on that, because if you're relying on that, it comes back as unnatural, like you're trying to give this like canned speech thing. And part of it is just do your research and then kind of just use that to kind of help give you a quick flash and get yourself back on track. And if you're using it that way and it's allowed, then I highly recommend it. And it was allowed in all my interviews and it worked great for me, allowing my mind to get really quickly back on track. But again, I wasn't reading the thing during the interview.
Yeah, that's the key, is knowing whether it's allowed or not. And you should be able to figure that out with a little bit of research. At my previous agency, it was allowed. At my current agency, it is not allowed. So at my previous agency, I walked in with a folder, a pen, my bullet points. And when they would ask a question, I would be like, oh yeah, I'm writing down the question. Meanwhile, all I'm doing is looking at my bullet points, maybe making a note or two so I don't get tripped up on the question. But that gives me a chance to, I'm really interested in what you're saying. Meanwhile, I'm like, what am I going to say to this one, right? So if it's allowed, cool. But just don't find yourself in a position where you think, yeah, it is allowed, and it turns out it's not. And they're like, why are you bringing that in there? Leave that outside of the room. And now you're going in cold, and you rehearsed in a way that is not like how you're going to have to perform. Improvement with. But I'll just pass it off to Lloyd and Dan just for some closing comments.
I just want to thank everyone who participated today, my colleagues, as well as everybody, all the participants, future clients. I think just the fact that you're here, and I know I said it a few times, that's your +1 already. Just keep going the way you are, taking this. If you get coaching or not, continue reading, lifelong learning, and we just need to stick together and keep this profession as awesome as it always was, and continue on down the road. And then that's what it's really all about for me, the passion, and just to keep it moving forward. We're always going to be in tough times. Stuff's going to happen, but it is the most noble profession when done correctly. And I just applaud you all for being here. Thank you.
Thanks for sharing this day with us in this webinar. Hopefully, again, that there are some takeaways. One other thing I can encourage y'all is, like, you may not bat 1,000 every time, meaning, I didn't get every promotional, every assignment. And so we'd like to help you get there. But sometimes, if you've gone through the process a couple times and it hasn't worked out, hey, just learn from that and learn, like, okay, because each process has a little bit of nuance that can help prepare you for the next time. And then as I will say it seems that the more that you practice some of the stuff, the more your confidence. And if you kind of take the mindset out of like, oh, this panel, they're going to keep me off my guard by asking me these weird questions. Hey, just try to anticipate what some of the questions are. Practice some of your answers. Really know the why you're getting into it, and then know the message that you want to bring forward to this panel. And I do think that'll help your confidence get as you prepare for the next process.
I agree. I just want to echo what those gentlemen said, and Mike as well, and say that we are your biggest fans, right? Savage Training Group is made up of nothing more than hardworking law enforcement professionals, and we have just kind of this very singular mission, which is to deliver the best possible training to you so that you can advance your career, become an expert, and hopefully save lives, right? And hopefully save lives. So I just encourage you to check out all the training we have online, in person, everything, articles, videos, it's all at savagetraininggroup.com. Please go check all that stuff out there. And really just want to thank you all for the work you do as a law enforcement officer. It is meaningful. Don't get too bogged down with the police critics. The reason they're criticizing you is because it's so important. If the job you did was not important, no one would want to talk about it. Thank you very much, and be safe.